Johnny, are you hearing us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yes. Good to go?
So, yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, your stream's now live.
So,
Thanks, Nigel.
It's not.
Okay, we are good to go.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Apologies for my technical problems. There's a combination of laptops and speakers. I think I've got the right combination. Welcome to you all to this meeting of the Police and Crime Panel. It's Tuesday, the 28th of September. Thank you all for your attendance. We'll start with agenda item 1. Apologies for absence. Andrea, have we received any?
We've received apologies from Councillor Brian Tipper. He has to be in Audit and Governance, which is on at the same time as us.
Okay, yeah, and we understand there's a specific function that committee, which means you had to choose that one over this one, which is totally understandable. Minutes of the previous meeting. Do any members have any issues that they'd like to raise from that? Martin, yes.
Yeah, it'd be good if I was as being present. To be fair, I was noted as being present for the second half, but not the first half.
I think we can probably have that amended.
I'll amend that. Yeah, I'll amend that. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, I'll take that as everybody. Well, is everybody happy that's a true and faithful account? Good. Thank you. Any declarations of interest today?
The system in
I'm really sorry, but we're just going to have to pause a moment. Do you remember I mentioned we were having some technical difficulties this morning? Well, it appears that they're having technical difficulties in the cabinet, in the council chamber as well. So we're just going to get unplugged from our big screen, and I'll be running this just from the laptop. So if you hear any strange noises, any groans, that's just the men moving the screen out.
Sorry.
So
I apologise now.
They are very, very apologetic. Okay.
All right, going. All right.
So if you want to.
Andrea, I don't know if you deliberately muted there, but I think we lost your audio. Okay. All right, next agenda item. So just double check. Can you hear me? Because I've lost sound in this here.
Yeah.
You can. Great, thank you. Next agenda item is update on activity from the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner. We've got Richard Bradley and Chris Nelson listed for this agenda item. We've got 20 minutes to go into this. It would be very helpful if within that 20 minutes we can make sure there's plenty of time for questions that panel members might have. So I'll hand over to Richard and Chris. I'm not sure which one of you wants to pick up from here.
Thanks, Joe. Let Chris go first.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. I assume you can hear me, Johnny, okay?
Absolutely fine, thank you.
And hopefully see me okay. We've got a new technology system here, trying to sort of make it all work. Just one thing straight off the bat that occurs to me in future. I'm a great believer as we move forward, if we can, to meet in person, and it would be lovely if we could find some alternative solution that works for everyone, so that, you know, we can sort of look at each other in the eye rather than, because machinating this whole thing, as we've found this morning, can be a bit difficult. And I just think these sort of occasions are better done face to face. So although we'd be very happy to do it here, I think we can't because the public wouldn't be able to get in easily. But there's all, you know, the 6 other council chambers, presumably, that would potentially work. So I just throw that in as something for consideration in the future, if at all possible. Moving on to my update. The last meeting panel we had, which I thought was excellent, really good, productive meeting. And Johnny, you and I have had meetings in your patch in St. Paul's and privately, which I think have all been very good and help the developing relationship. and some of the things that you talked to me, Johnny, maybe we can talk about either in the meeting or privately. But in terms of my update about what's been going on the last couple of months, in the main, we've had roadshows. This is a new initiative that I want to do around the country. We've got 6 planned. We've had 4, 2 more to do. I think they've all been very successful. The staff here in Waterwells tell me that we've had more people at these roadshows than we've ever had before at similar type of police events, which I'm very heartened by. And it's not just us talking to the public about what we're up to. We're very much in listening mode, and we've had lots of interesting and thoughtful, thought-provoking questions from the public, which we've obviously investigated. Cheltenham and Tewkesbury, a couple of weeks' time. So if you haven't been to one of the road shows, I would thoroughly recommend that every panel member try and avail themselves of that opportunity, because we cover a wide range of issues. And generally on these first road shows, I've got something like 35 members of the constabulary and my staff. So it's very well supported by the team. And I'd be very surprised if there was any question anyone ever had on policing and crime that someone there wasn't able to answer. And because I'm at the start of my term of office as well, I think it's important that as many of us as possible are on the same song sheet in terms of where I'm trying to take the constabulary, what the Chief Constable thinks. So please, if you haven't attended one, please try and get to Cheltenham or Tewkesbury. Now, I suppose the next big thing is the first few months of my office, I've been concentrating really on internal constabulary matters, strategic matters, finance matters, trying to ensure that the key ingredients of the manifesto can be delivered. And by that, I mean the 300 more officers, 150 more special constables, and 103 extra police staff. Now, the 103 extra police staff wasn't in my manifesto as a specific promise, but one of my top 6 priorities was sorting out the 101 non-emergency telephone line, the force control room. So I agreed with the chief very, very early on that there were some serious problems with the force control room that needed to be addressed up front. And because of those problems, we've got issues with crime data integrity, how the force records crimes coming in to the constabulary. And not to put too fine a point on it, we will very shortly have a formal report from Her Majesty's Inspectorate, which I don't intend to talk about here because it's not yet published, but it would be true to say probably we'll see it publicly in a few weeks' time, and it's going to be quite hard-hitting, and it's about really the force control room. So that's why very early on, I agreed with the chief that strategically we needed to put solutions in place to solve this problem, and that's what the 103 police staff are. Because that's over and above what I thought I'd have to do within my campaign, it means that the delivery of the 300 officers has to be in 2 phases. So it's 200 officers in phase 1, 100 officers in phase 3. Sorry, phase 2. Slip of the tongue. So 200 officers in phase 1, 100 officers in phase 2. My third big point to raise in this update is the police and crime prevention plan. And to make sure I don't talk the hind legs off all the donkeys in the room, I'm going to get Ruth to talk about that when on that agenda item. And I won't say any more on the police and crime prevention plan at this stage. There've been lots of other issues. You may have seen in the press things like Fred West, election of a new commissioner in Wiltshire and what that means for cooperation across the southwest, pet theft, a whole load of things which I'll leave for questions. My attention now is switching from the strategic to the operational, so that now that I've got a big picture agreement with the chief over the total number of resources, I see that as the cavalry coming over the hilltop, but they're going to take time to get here. So the big question in my mind is, what are we going to do between now and the arrival of that cavalry, the extra officers, the extra police staff, the extra special constables? What are we going to do different to how we've been doing things in the past? So things like antisocial behaviour, rural, this problem with the force control room, scams, drugs, violence against women and girls. What can we do better, or what can we do more that we like that we're doing at the moment? So that's where I'm spending my next few months of time, getting to grips with how the force proposes to deal with those issues, to discuss with them the way ahead, and to hold them to account on the delivery of that. So that's all I propose to say for my update. Nick now will talk a little bit about some of the things that he's been up to.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, everybody. Very good to be here and to join you formally, which is fantastic. So I've been in post for about 8 weeks now, since I was very pleased to be appointed at the last meeting. During that time, I've been focusing a great deal on sort of visibility, getting out and seeing things, meeting people, not just our own officers, but the public as well, attending the roadshows that Chris has already spoken about and a variety of other sessions as well. We've also been picking up some casework with issues that people have been raising with the office that we're sort of taking a lead on. Last week, I chaired my first meeting of the new Safer Gloucestershire board. So that's my first meeting of that as chair, which was to sort of reconstitute the group. I was very clear that I wanted it to sort of reinvigorate it, because I know that there has been some issues with it in the past. And one of the first things that I've done is invited and made sure that we've got attendance from the chairs of all the community safety partnerships, because I do see that sort of interaction between the CSPs and Safer Gloss as being very important. I want sort of Safer Gloss to sort of have almost a sort of framework responsibility for making people safer in the county, in the same way that Health and Wellbeing Board looks after their sort of health and wellbeing. I want Safer Gloss to look after community safety, and to have that sort of two-way partnership approach to doing things between Safer Gloss and the CSPs. One of the things that I'm pleased to say that the Safer Gloucestershire agreed was that we would run a sort of self-assessment programme looking at the role of Safer Gloucestershire and the CSPs, and we're going to sort of put a sort of set of terms of reference together that I'll be more than happy to share with the panel once they've been put together by our sort of working group from Safer Gloucestershire to make sure that we know what we're doing and we're delivering it in a good and effective way. I think it's probably also worth saying at this point that we had some really good attendance at that meeting. I was very pleased to see the sort of level of engagement that we had, and the sort of positivity that was around reinvigorating Safer Gloucestershire and making sure that it actually delivers, because I want that to be a delivery group. I don't want it just to be sort of a talking shop and signing things off. I want to make sure that it's delivering things as well, and that the plans and processes that we put in place actually have an impact on the ground. So that's one of the key things I want to do from that. We're also looking at doing some meetings with our sort of council colleagues as well, sort of one-to-ones that should be coming up very shortly. Chris and I had a really good session last week on antisocial behaviour with the constabulary, looking at the tools and tactics that the constabulary have at their disposal. That's one of the key things that we want to go out and talk to the council leaderships when we're going to see them, to develop that partnership working, which is so important to both of us. So I think I will stop there. Obviously, more than happy to have any sort of questions as they're going on, but I think I'll stop there, if that's okay, Chair. Rich, do you want to pick up now?
Yeah, thanks very much. Thank you, Chair. Just a few things from me. We were awarded a silver award at a recent public sector transformation event in London. Previously, we've won a gold and a bronze award. It's through an organisation called IESE, and they are a public sector transformation organisation. And we won the award for the Sabrina Centre, which some of you may have been to. It was a disused laboratory at the nuclear power plant at Berkeley. We acquired it and we turned it into what I say is one of the best learning and development centres in the country. It's great for our staff and all that use it. So it's really pleased to share that with you today. In relation to domestic abuse, which is a very topical subject at the moment, there's a new Domestic Abuse Act, which has just come into force. As part of a collaborative approach with Gloucestershire County Council, we're about to recruit a domestic abuse and sexual violence consultation officer, which is a joint funded between the County Council and ourselves. That person will actually help to bring in the real meaning and purpose of the new Domestic Abuse Act, and that's about supporting the victims, whether they're male or female. So we're really pleased to announce that as well. And the other thing we're doing is we're going to recruit an analyst for the office, something that we should have probably had from 2012 when we started, was a position of an analyst, because there's a lot of information that comes to our office. And I think at times the thing that's missing for us is about the ability to analyse and actually progress with based on that. So that's all what we're doing at the moment. Thank you.
Thanks all. Okay, members, do we have any indications for speaking? I can see. Okay, we'll start with okay, I've got 4. We'll start with Philip, and then we'll move to Ray, and I have Joe and Martin. So Philip, we'll start with you, please.
Okay. Hear me okay, everybody? Yeah?
Just about, yeah.
Yeah, good. Okay, thank you. Right, first thing I'd like, I think, is echo the Commissioner's view on face-to-face meetings. I think now we should, and I'm sure that we would be very happy to welcome the Police and Crime Panel to the Chamber at Colford at any time. I'm sure it can be sorted out, and it would make these meetings a lot more effective, I think. So coming on to my question, I'm not quite sure who's going to pick this up. I guess probably Chris, but you know, I don't really mind. I'm certainly criticise the additional officers and police staff. I think that that's a good move, but I am interested to hear a little bit about the financial implications of that, how much it's going to cost, where is the money coming from, and perhaps on the back of that, will the expenditure on the extra personnel impact on the capital programme in any way? And actually, how does the Commissioner see the capital programme going on in the future as well?
Okay, thanks. No, it's an interesting and important question, Philip. I spent most of the last few months trying to get to grips with that issue. And when I came in to this job, I found more problems than I was anticipating. So, for instance, there was a serious risk of an overspend in year, first of all, which we had to get to grips with and sort out. And certainly the last time of looking, we seem to be on top of that, although I've got another finance meeting this week where I'll be having a rain check on that particular issue. And that was a substantial amount of money, you know, a couple of million pressure of overspend. So we've reined things in where appropriate to get that under control. I then needed to create what I called a pot of gold so that we could kickstart recruitment process on all of these figures that I've talked about. And we were looking to create efficiencies. Also, quite a clever accounting way of how to manage our capital spend in terms of how we accounted for capital spending. Instead of perhaps historically paying for capital, you know, new buildings, things like that, IT, paying for it almost up front over a few years. It's more appropriate, I think, to pay for capital over the useful length of life of that bit of capital or building or IT. So spread the cost over a longer period of time. And that allows you to use revenue for things like manpower increases. So that was a useful approach to the way we manage the budget that allows me to start this process and get the agreement of my financial experts that the plan that I want to deliver is potentially achievable. Because if we couldn't figure that out, my financial experts who have legal responsibilities in terms of managing budgets, just like your financial experts within your council budgets, they could say no. They really not support my plan, but they do support my plan. We've agreed that from a governance point of view at the very highest level within the constabulary. So we're going forward jointly with this plan for the 300 more officers and all the other increases. Now, I don't have all the money sorted for the delivery of those individuals, and really until I see the outcome of what spending allocation we're going to get on the new 3-year spending plan, which I think is a brilliant innovation. We've been pushing for a while. Generally in the past, it's just spending on a 1-year basis. So now going forward, whenever we get notified, it'll be for 3 years, which will really make long-term strategic planning easier to do. So when we get that, and when we get details of what uplift we've got within each of those 3 years, I'll then be able to sit down and figure out, well, what increase in council tax, the precept, we need to do to balance the books so that I can achieve all the things that we're trying to achieve. And later on in the meeting, I'm sure we'll be talking about work going ahead. I said at the last meeting I'd be keen to have a working group on the finance side of things that we can sort of sit down and talk to you about what we're intending to do on finance. And for instance, quite shortly, I want to work up a public consultation early so that we can chat to the public about what we want to deliver and what it might cost, what are the implications for council tax. And rather than doing such a consultation, say last year, very late in the day and really too late to influence the budget paper that you got in the February, I want to, well, I would encourage the panel to form a little working group on finance to say meet before we put the public consultation out, after we put the public consultation, get the returns back, and probably another meeting just before the panel receives the formal budget in February of next year, so that you can see the thinking that's going on within Waterwells and the solutions we want to bring, the problems we're trying to solve, and the proposed way ahead.
Chris, can I just check what you're requesting is that the panel forms a financial working group, and that working group meets at least 2 times, and that you conduct a public consultation prior to February next year? Correct. Okay. Next question we had on the list was Ray Brassington, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was going to ask about finance the same as Phil has, but on one thing the Commissioner's just mentioned about this working group of members on the panel, is that within our remit to do that? It's
I mean, it's only a suggestion. I remember when I was on the panel, that's exactly what happened. When I was a councillor in Cheltenham Borough Council, I was on the panel for about 4 years. And I remember at least 1 year where there was this offer that we formed a little working group. And I can remember coming here to Waterwells and sitting around the table talking with the financial experts about the emerging plan. And it's just an offer, you know, you don't have to take it up. But I got the impression from the last meeting that the panel was wanting a closer relationship, better understanding. And from my point of view, I value the input the panel can give as elected representatives. You know, you represent your own patches, and it makes sure, you know, it's one way you can hold my feet to the fire and hold me to account as my thinking develops.
I think we'll have to get a legal opinion on whether that's within our remit, because I'm not sure. But Andrea's waving like mad.
Andrea, do you want to come in on that?
We can't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Yes.
It's good that David is here. So yes, it's entirely appropriate for the panel to have a working group. You can have a working group on anything within its remit, and obviously, clearly, part of your job is to agree the precepts, so it's not a problem.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, appreciate that. We've had a message from Dawn in the chat saying she'd like to be in that working group. I think if members could just email, if members could email their interest to me directly and quickly, I think. Into Andrea, I think. But if we can get that, we need to move on that very quickly if we're gonna make a difference on that prior to February. I appreciate the request from the Commissioner, and I think if members are keen, then we should try and honour that request. David, I noticed you've also joined the queue to speak. We're already running slightly over time, so let's try and make our questions and answers punchy, please. The next question is Councillor Harris. Can't hear you yet, Joe.
Now? You can hear me, yeah?
Yeah, fire away.
Yeah, I've got three questions, if you don't mind. Should require fairly straightforward answers. Mr. Nelson, you talk about 300 new officers and they're going to be phased. Can you tell me over what time period those are going to be phased? So when are we going to get the 300 officers in total? That's the first question. I'll come back to the second.
The answer to that is I'm very much hoping to achieve all that I want to achieve within the manifesto within the term of my office, which is 3 years. Highly demanding. Normally it's 4 years, but we lost a year because of COVID. But that's what I'm working towards, trying to do all of that within 3 years.
Okay, thank you. You made a big pitch in your election campaign about fighting rural crime. You know, in particular, the use of drones, ANPR cameras, and obviously as a Cotswold member, that's something, you know, that's a particular concern for myself. So what's the update on that? When's that going to happen? And then I've got one more question after that.
On rural, yes, you're right. It's very much one of my top 6 priorities. Funnily enough, although ASB was probably my top priority, I addressed rural crime first. It was just the way it worked, because the senior officer superintendent who was leading on this issue had already worked up a new approach, a new policy, which includes things like heritage crime. And we've had seminars, and all sorts of interesting working groups. The other day, for instance, I was talking to a farmer south of Stroud about hare coursing, which is a huge problem. And just as I've conducted a campaign for a new law on pet theft, I'm beginning to feel I need to develop a head of steam over perhaps a change of the law over hare coursing, because it's a major problem in our rural areas. I'm also working with the fire service, looking at fire stations to see whether we can extend the footprint of our police officers in rural areas in particular, because I think often people in rural areas feel like second-class citizens. Response rates are very slow, or slower than for urban areas. And I think if we can get more police out into fire stations, that should be better. I want to double the number of officers that are specialist rural officers. We have 4 at the moment. I want 4 PCSOs to supplement them, and also more special constables to work on dealing with rural crime. Those are just a few things off the top of my head.
Could I just come in with an extra one? It's worth making the point that the extra officers that Chris has committed to will also mean that you will now have a 7-day a week neighbourhood policing service in all rural districts, which you don't have at the moment. You only have 2 shifts in rural areas at the moment. Because of the extra officers that we've committed to, you're now getting 3 shifts, which means you'll have a 7-day a week service, which doesn't exist at the moment. So that's linking those 2 commitments together to demonstrate the impact.
Can I just ask a supplementary on that, if you'll permit me, Chair? Because I don't think I quite got the answer there. On your website, and indeed on the video where you talk about rural crime, you say there are there are a couple of key things. I want to develop a neighbourhood police team approach, which I think you've just alluded to, but I'd also use new technologies such as drones and ANPR. My question is, what is happening with drones and ANPR? When are we going to see a rollout of those technologies to help tackle rural crime?
Okay, well, one of the reasons I didn't touch that was something that I talk about in the road shows, and one of the key big issues that I'm pushing in the road shows, community speed watch, because certainly in rural areas, I probably have more interest over dealing with persistent speeding in rural areas than in, say, urban areas. And I've examined some low-cost, high-technology solutions that do ANPR type approach, not as sophisticated as automatic number plate recognition, but a lot cheaper, more affordable, easier to deploy. And over the last few months, we've been working up a new policy for the deployment of that technology, because previously, both the police and highways have been resistant to the deployment of that low-cost, high-technology boxes, box of tricks that you are attached to lampposts. And because of concerns over data protection and things like that, we've had all sorts of problems, which I think we've now overcome and allowed parish councils to acquire that technology. ANPR is very expensive, but if parish councils want to acquire it, this new strategy that we've developed will facilitate that. But my anticipation is that probably wards, councils, parishes will want to go for the low-cost, high-technology solution rather than the high-cost, very high-technology ANPR type solution. Drones we've already got, and really the issue is if we increase the number of people that specialise in their use, then we should be able to see more deployment of drones. So from 4 to 8 rural officers. And also as well, last week I was out with the counter-terrorist team, which is a specialist team that deals with terrorist threats. We don't have too many of those at the moment, but it's a highly trained group of individuals. One of their skill sets is operating drones, and we're making use of that team to do more drone type activity because they've got the time and capacity to do so.
It is also worth noting that drones deployment is something that's being looked at nationally as well as part of the review for National Police Air Service too. So there's national work going on along those lines as well. But it's one of the things that we've been talking about, that extra training, how that can be, how we can empower more officers to be able to do that. It doesn't necessarily need to be a fully warranted regular officer. We've got special constables that are already drone pilots that are able to deploy and use them as well. And we've been talking about using police community support officers to be able to do it as well. So it's just using the technologies that are available to be able to interdict criminality wherever it rears its head.
Thanks. Yeah, we'll watch those two issues with interest. Final question. Thank you for indulging me, Chair. On part of your plan, Mr. Commissioner, was to review the Commissioner's budget. By ending the culture of spin and waste in the Commissioner's office, you will free up cash for more officers to fight crime hotspots. How much money are you saving by ending this culture of spin and waste, or was that just spin?
I think the previous regime had their own way of looking at things. So, for instance, Martin spent a lot of money on buildings, for instance. Now, he's produced some very nice buildings, for instance, Sabrina. Richard talked about the award that it won. Yeah, it's a very nice building. But the investment that's been placed, the amount of money that's been spent on buildings, we've got Bam Furlong, for instance, 12 million. That has meant that we have not spent money on things that we really, really, really need to spend money on. And I'm thinking in particular about the force control room, the 101 non-emergency answering service. Generally, people in the public don't talk to me about the poor quality of police buildings, but what they do talk to me about is the fact that they can't get through to the police on 101. The last time I looked at it, the average wait time was over 7 minutes. On a 999 call, average time is twice the national accepted target. So it's about 23 seconds instead of 10 seconds. That to me is unacceptable. The 101 service is failing, and we definitely need more resources, not just more manpower, but more technology.
But Mr. Commissioner, I get what you're saying. I've just asked for how much money are you saving by ending the culture spin and waste? So like a figure. How much money are you saving? That was a specific manifesto commitment. How much money are you saving by ending the culture of spin and waste? How much money are you saving? You must know it was a key manifesto pledge.
I think it's of the region of £2 million that I've used to kickstart these solutions that I've
£2 million. That's great. Thank you, Commissioner.
Well, in the interest of cutting down on spin and waste, we're running we're running well ahead of well over time here, and I know there's a list of questions and I do want to get through them. So let's just keep our questions and answers very punchy, please. Phil, on that note, just before moving on to the next question, there is an unanswered question earlier. Philip Burford requested knowing specifically, the cost of extra personnel and where the money will come from. Now, I know, Commissioner, you spoke about spreading the cost of equipment over time to free up some money. Does that cover all of it? I think what the panel are looking for real specifics here. So if you could answer that directly, that would be helpful. And from then, we'll then move on to Martin and David.
The total cost of all the different manpower increases is around 10 million. It depends over what time period you talk about, because obviously over time it builds up, because most of the increases are manpower. So there's a spend every particular year, but around 10 million is probably the simplest answer.
And that's 10 million annual?
No, it's over, say, the next 3 years.
Okay, thank you. Next question is from Martin.
Forgive me, this is on the Police and Crime Commissioner's specific track. I note how we've had 3 presentations verbally Chris, Nick and Richard. In the past, we have had a Chief Executive Officer's report, which was one of the specific details that we'd get at this meeting. A question for Chris is, do you intend to keep having just the 3 presenting? I was quite relaxed with that, especially with this agenda with some paperwork, but I'd be worried if we missed all the actual detailed paperwork that came with meetings. So was that your decision, no Chief Executive Officer report?
Yeah, as my understanding, the way the last meeting went and subsequent discussions between, say, Ruth and the Secretariat, that was the preferred way of working. I'm happy to play this any which way that you like, but it's a question of providing information and content in the way that it's more meaningful for you. And that's why I think we've ended up with the agenda that you've got in front of you today. But happy to change if you want to change it.
I'm happy to see how it works. Thank you for the explanation.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gray.
False.
That's David, isn't it?
Sorry, David, I missed that. What did you say?
I think he's passing.
Passing. Okay. Okay. Thank you all. Next agenda item is obviously the most kind of substantive section of the meeting. We've cut into time a little bit. Welcome, Councillor Patel. Thanks for joining us. So we'll hand over straight to I think Ruth is going to lead here. So we'll hand over to Ruth, and I'm quite confident that that we can get through this agenda. It's quite pleasing to me to see now members and questions and answers are now getting straight to the point, which I think everyone is in favour of. So let's try and maintain that as we go forwards. But Ruth, the floor is yours. Please press on with your presentation.
Okay, Chris, did you want to open with anything? Shall I just go straight in?
No, I think if you crack on and I might chip in from now and again, or maybe leave it for questions.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, panel. This is the 3rd time I've presented this presentation. And what I always say, and this is really, really important to us to get across, this is a draft. It is a genuine draft. We want this plan to work for as many people as possible. And to my knowledge, we've sent it out to a far greater audience in this consultation space than we've done previously in the office. For example, you were given copies as soon as it went live on the roadshows. Paper copies have been made available to everybody at the roadshows. I've also sent it out to stakeholders that we work with, voluntary and community groups, Safer Gloucestershire board members, community safety partnerships. I'm also very keen to get many diverse views as possible. So I'm working with the Future Me youth representatives in Stroud Youth Parliament to get their views on the plan. Because as I said, we're very keen that this becomes as good as possible, a good a product as possible. So genuinely, we welcome any feedback and we will do our best to pull that into the final draft. So just running through things. So we've tried to make it feel quite different to previous plans. First of all, there is a plan on the page. I mean, this will be refined, but we were hoping that this can be a go-to reference, probably see some posters about with this sort of information on there around our estate, etc. But these are the things that that we want to focus on, and I'll just take each area on the circle here as I'll go through the presentation. So first things first, there are a number of golden threads through the plan that you will see. It's and we genuinely hope it comes across that these are threads that go through everything that we aim with we prioritise. First of all, public health approach to policing, i.e. seeking to address the causes of crime. Now, I sent across to Andrea, and hopefully you've got a copy, but if you haven't, it's available as a hyperlink through the plan, the College of Policing's approach to public health approaches to policing. But that's about understanding how people end up in criminality, what we can do to address that as early as possible, its earliest intervention as possible. It's understanding where adverse childhood experiences comes in, and it's being trauma informed. Second area that's a golden thread is our restorative practices, something that we're very strong on in Gloucestershire, and we want to continue that. It's fair to say Chris and Nick were blown away really when they met our colleagues in Restorative Gloucestershire. There's more that can be done. For example, we are continuing our commitment to Children's First, but we're looking to see how we can expand that for adults as well, to try and prevent people getting into the criminal justice system wherever possible. We know that reduces reoffending. We know that there's better outcomes for victims. So why wouldn't we do that? So we're committed to restorative practices throughout. Very, very good meeting recently with Dame Janet Trotter and Andy Dempsey from Gloucestershire County Council about child-friendly Gloucestershire. And I'm really personally really pleased to see that seeking to put children at the centre of all that we do is going to be core to the way the OPCC continues to work. We started child friendly in this office, and I'm very pleased, as I say personally, to see that we continue with that. It's vitally important, hence me going to Stroud Youth Parliament, for example, in future me to seek their views, and we'll probably end up with another version of the plan that's specific for young people. And neighbourhood policing, that is absolutely fundamental to everything that we do. We will invest in that. You've heard about the commitments that have been made and the finances that are being realised to put into neighbourhood policing. And I've just put in there the Pelian quote that's often used, which is the public are the police, the peace of the public and the public are the police. And that's always going to be at the heart of what we do. This one raises a few eyebrows, but this is really about, this plan is Chris's plan. It's I think MRE3 really signifies that. It's a phrase that he used with us, and it actually refers to his time in the forces, and it's food rations, isn't it? That he could explain. Meals ready to eat.
It's something that in the first Gulf War, when I was working with the American Marines, their rations are not very popular, and they always used to swap camp beds and things like that with our rations, but their rations were known as MRE, meals ready to eat. It's a phrase that was imprinted on my memory, and when I came into this job, I wanted to think of a simple way of describing what I was about, where I wanted to go, in an easy to remember phrase, and I came up with MRE3.
And we did think about keeping it an internal thing, but actually we think it's a good way of explaining that throughout the plan we have tried to capture the manifesto commitments, so you will see them throughout. We need to ensure that we've got the right resources. He is the commissioner after all, and we will do all that we can to make sure that resources can go into the right places, and we get as much as we can in terms of finances into the constabulary, bidding for money, for example, national bids. And Chris is very keen that we become an exemplar force in as many ways as possible. We talked about rural crime today. There's more to do. There's always more to do. But actually, we are leading the way regionally and nationally, and in some cases internationally, around our rural crime and the way we tackle. While our officers are asked to train other forces, for example, around rural crime. So we want to use that as an example, but there's many other areas that we can become an exemplar. And as Chris has said, there's only 3 years to turn this around. Unlike normal terms of office 4 years, there's only 3 years. So it's just a reminder, really, for us all that we've got a short time frame to deliver. Just going on to the commitments now, the priorities. Sorry. The first one is to reduce antisocial behaviour and neighbourhood crime and increase feelings of safety. When we talk about antisocial behaviour and neighbourhood crime, what we're talking about are those crimes that cause the most amount of harm to communities. Things that Chris has heard loud and clear in his campaign, but also things that we know through the Crime Survey of England and Wales, or the British Crime Survey formerly, that cause communities the most amount of harm. So we've tried to capture that. Included in this are the national policing and crime measures that we're all starting to measure. And it's about understanding that sometimes it's not about just the volumes of crime, it's about understanding what communities tell us are important, and I'll come on to that again with another priority later on. It's about understanding that antisocial behaviour can affect your quality of life. It's not something that should be dismissed as low level and insignificant. And one of the questions I've been asked quite a lot since Chris came into office is, what does zero tolerance to ASB actually mean? It is not about throwing enforcement at everybody. It's about trying to stop things happening in the first place, working with communities, working with partners to try and resolve problems before they escalate, but understanding that if we don't, this really affects people's quality of life and how they feel about their communities as a whole. So it's really important that we try and tackle ASB as soon as possible in partnership with others. We want to do what we can to improve how we tackle ASB, and one of the things we've been looking at is how we use the community triggers. At the moment that sits with Restorative Gloucestershire, but there might be a better way of doing that, but certainly making people aware that they have options around community triggers, which is about where people feel that agencies that have a say in tackling antisocial behaviour feel that they've been slightly let down and they've got a right to have things reviewed. As the priority suggests, we're not just looking at actually reducing crime, we're talking about increasing feelings of safety. When I presented this to the Cotswold Safer Partnership, Community Safety Partnership, they were really pleased for this, because we know on the face of it, the Cotswolds is a low crime area, but people do feel scared, they do have fears, they do have concerns. And it's really important that we address that and we tackle that as a priority as much as tackling crime, because again, this affects people's quality of life. And we really do look to those people that take positions of leadership in communities to help us with that. It's really, really important. But in order to help us understand that and measure that, we will be introducing a survey soon that very much mirrors the Crime Survey of England and Wales, to be able to see what concerns people, what their priorities are, what their confidence levels are in agencies and tackling crime and disorder, and look to address those issues in conjunction with our community safety partnerships. Priority 2 is about strong, visible and responsive policing. You've heard a lot about this already today. It's about getting more officers, more visibility, being able to contact the police better. It's about feeding back as well. Really important. One of the biggest complaints that we have in force is about people not having feedback once they've reported an issue. So we need to turn this around. This is something that we're very, very committed to. It's about extra officers, as I've said, and as Chris has said, but it's also about workforce modernisation. Why have warranted officers doing certain jobs when staff can do the same? It's about reducing bureaucracy and improving technology. And it's also about collaboration. Chris mentioned we're looking at ways that we can work on estate matters with partners around improving visibility. But that's just the start of it. You know, we're looking at that now, but it'll be hopefully that will lead on to bigger and better things with other partners. We've already talked about investment in the control room, so I won't go into that. But as I said, this is very much about improved visibility and connectivity between the constabulary and the public that they serve. This is an area that doesn't often get, or in our experience in the APCC, it often doesn't get the exposure that we think it deserves, and we're really, really pleased to see this as a priority in the new Police and Crime Prevention Plan. We can do all that we can to intervene early, to reassure communities, but if the criminal justice system isn't fit for purpose, if there are problems in the criminal justice system, we have the perpetual problem of people going through the revolving door of courts into custody, into prison, and we don't deal with the issues that cause criminality. And this is what this priority is about. It's about working together to improve justice in Gloucestershire. It's improved outcomes for victims, witnesses and offenders, and obviously that very much ties into what I was saying about restorative practices. It's understanding that we are dealing with COVID at the moment and the backlog of court listings. That is coming down, I hasten to add, but you know, we are not in a position where we are delivering swift justice, and that's not good for those that are either victims, witnesses, or even for the offenders as well. And very much connected to this is our commitment and prioritisation of the Victims Code. Victims Code is what you can expect if you become a victim of crime. It's not just what you can expect from the police, it's what you can expect of partners as well, so the criminal justice agencies. And we have responsibilities for monitoring that and holding to account. It's interesting that phase 2 of the PCC review is looking at more oversight and more involvement in the criminal justice side for PCCs, and I think Victims Code will be core to that as well. So it's absolutely vital that we have that front and centre in our plan. Vulnerability and victimisation. This is very much, as I said, about being trauma informed, about understanding what causes people to perhaps go into become criminalised or at risk of criminalisation, but also at risk of victimisation. Really interesting study a couple of years ago around the impact of domestic violence on future prospects of young people if they witness it in the home. You know, it's why it's important to try and stop it, because it's not just the here and now, it's for future generations as well. Focus on this in the priority here on those crime types that we know disproportionately affect particular groups, and I've listed a few on the slide here, but that's not an exhaustive list. With it, that's just indicative. We know there's more there, but it's absolutely vital that we prioritise those offences that really do single out certain groups of people. This is very much, again, about victim empowerment and support, and we will work with our partner agencies, our stakeholders, on ensuring that this is absolutely right, this priority, and it's also, as I said, about adult and child safeguarding. So, empowering local communities. You've seen that we've already shown that we're committed to this by the roadshows. We're looking at what more we can do. I've mentioned the survey that we're going to be investing in, but it's about reaching out to communities, listening to what they tell us. As I said, not just concentrating on volumes of crimes, but listening to what harms communities, and rural crime is one of those areas. The ripple effect of a bad experience from the constabulary or the victimisation in particularly rural communities it's far-reaching, and we need to understand it and act on that and prioritise that. It's about acting on what we hear and feeding back to communities. We see this as a continual loop. And this is absolutely core to the way we're going to be working moving forward. It's absolutely essential if we are what we say we are, which is the public voice for policing. We are committed as well to improving our transparency through scrutiny. We already have a very successful independent custody volunteer scheme. We've recently launched an animal welfare scheme, which uses members of the public to come in and assess how well we're looking after our dogs in force. We're also looking to replicate a scheme in Avon and Somerset, whereby they use members of the public to help with the complaints process. We think this is something that will really open up what we do. Complaints is a really good tool to understand what's causing harm in communities. Where there might be pockets within the constabulary that need a bit of a focus, some learning and development, or some tighter scrutiny. And we're looking to develop the models that we've created successfully with independent custody visitors and use that in other areas. Specifically acting on where community concerns have been raised with Chris over the campaign, I've listed some areas here. These areas could be in other parts of the plan, but we thought it was really important to list them here under community empowerment, because these are the things that Chris has been told are important to the public. We've got road safety, we've talked about that, pet theft, we've talked about that as well. Internet and phone scams and fraud. We're about to launch, there's quite a lot that goes on in the force already about that, but we need to do more. Retail and business crime, and that's also about attacks on retail workers as well, which the National Police Chiefs Council are very aware of. They've done some work recently, and they're certainly encouraging PCCs to include that in their plans because it is an issue. And then obviously we've mentioned rural wildlife and heritage crime. What I'm hearing back from the feedback I've had so far about the plan is a lot of feedback from subject experts to say, oh, you could do more about this, you could do more about that, and you're absolutely right. There is always more that I can do, and I will do what I can, but this has to be a high-level plan. The detail comes in with the delivery plans, which will be scoped out once we've got the final plan in place, which we're hoping to be towards the end of October. These delivery plans will include measurements of success, and you'll see at the back of each of the priorities, I've included a table of what success looks like, how we will measure it. And I know that's something that the Police and Crime panel are particularly interested in, and we will be looking to you to scrutinise and hold us to account, really, to make sure that those are delivered, those successes are delivered. And just by way of an example, there are a number of ways that I'm suggesting that we can measure some successes, or what success might look like under these priorities, and I've included it on this slide here. This is actual data. This is from a range of sources, including force data, national data from the Office of National Statistics, or the iQuanta data that I've used in the past to present crime data. And we will be using as much as possible to place ourselves in context with peers, to look for improvements, and to demonstrate the success of the plan. As I said, this is genuinely a draft, and we do welcome any feedback. And if you do have any comments, maybe, I mean, I'll gather stuff today, but if you've got anything that you want to feedback to me directly, please do come directly to me, and I'll collate it and put it all together. Chris.
Thanks very much, Ruth. Ruth has been a real godsend to me in pulling a lot of this together from a wide range of points of view. So thank you very much. One thing I'd just like to say, I suppose, I had a long campaign, almost 2 years, and during that time I developed all sorts of thinking on policing and crime. But inside the tent looking out is very different from outside the tent looking in. And I've morphed quite a lot, and continue to morph as I learn more, as I listen to more of our experts. And for instance, when I came into this job, I was thinking, right, we need to have less crimes. That's obvious. That will lead to less victims, and that's got to be good. But I'm becoming more aware, I think, of the need to actually focus much more on victims. And that, funnily enough, although it's obviously a very good thing to do, can actually help you to focus on crimes. So, for instance, by focusing on victims, it means from the very start, what's the experience of the victim phoning 101? How quickly is the crime recorded and investigated? What sort of feedback is given to the victim? What understanding do we have of the problem? Are there any trends within that particular crime? Is that telling us something about crime hotspots? And all of that will help us to actually figure out who's the guilty party, collect the evidence, prosecute the guilty party, and sort the problem out. So I've become much more focused towards helping victims than I thought I would be when I started this job. And that's just one example of how I've morphed. So open to questions.
Okay, thank you both. Excuse me. Members, I'd like to hold the floor for a few minutes because I've got a couple of questions of my own. Firstly, just a bit of housekeeping. If you'd like to ask questions, please use the raise hand function on your monitors. And on that note, I've got to apologise to Councillor Melvin. I missed that you put in the chat in the last section that you had a question to ask. So please use that, because I can't see all the screens, but I can see the hands. So that'll really help me bring people in. But I do have I kind of want to set a bit of context here for this, because so far since you've taken office, Commissioner, you've come in with a set of manifesto priorities, and we've discussed them and we've looked at them, and obviously Ruth's just presented kind of the office's priorities as well, and kind of what the plan looks like, and what I need to kind of understand here, and I think would be really helpful, is how those two match up, basically. So in terms of the, my interest level really peaked when we looked at that measurement slide a moment ago, because actually in the draft plan that's going out to consultation, there's a lot of stuff that says success will be defined by increasing this or reducing that, but that's kind of, we can't scrutinize that unless there's figures attached to that. Okay, what doesn't it, an increase of increases are arbitrary without context and targets. So really, what I kind of want to start with from what we've just looked at is what I'd like to know is when will this panel be given sight of what the targets are, what is the existing data, when will what are the targets for improving that data, and what are the timelines for when we expect to implement that. So I think we need to understand this at the beginning. So that's my first question, and I do have one more. And also, members, I won't make a habit of jumping the queue. I really wanted to set this up in this way moving forwards. So that's my first question. Is when are we going to see the data, and does the data in measuring these targets, how compatible is that with your manifesto commitments? And please
Ruth,
raise your hands if you have questions.
Yeah, Ruth's going to kick off, and I might add something.
Okay, so I'm the kind of resident geek in the office. I do love a bit of performance. I work very, very closely with the Analyst, Research and Planning team in the constabulary. They're a shared service. And what we're doing at the moment is going through the plan. It is, as I said, it is a draft at the moment. It's indicative. Those tables at the back are indicative. And the constabulary are working on at the moment a performance framework to go under each priority. What I've tried to do is weave the manifesto pledges into the plan, so that they're all there. But so in terms of timescales, interesting enough, I had a very lengthy meeting last week with the Chief Constable and the head of performance. We looked at this. There is a draft of a performance framework that's going to be tweaked over the next month. I'm hopeful I may even be able to bring something to the next police and crime panel.
Yeah, the sequence of this is first of all to get the big picture agreed in the plan, and the mechanisms that we'll use to measure things are in the plan. But you're quite right, Johnny. There isn't a lot of detail there in terms of, well, what are the specifics? I'm very into performance targets. I'm not too sensitive about using the word like targets. Whenever I've looked at any other police and crime plans in the past, I've tended to feel they're full of warm words and not enough hard facts or clear direction of travel. Now, once the plan is agreed and everyone's signed up to it and it goes firm, then it's up to the force to figure out within its own area of expertise, following the instructions in the plan, what are the specifics that we will have. Now, on the presentation that Ruth did, I was keen that we gave a sort of an example of what it might look like. And the very last, or second to last slide is an example of what it could start to look like. But that will take a fair bit of work to develop that. And clearly, once we've done all that, and we've got the top level, what do you call it? Not data.
At the moment, we're calling it a framework.
A framework, a dashboard was the word I was looking for. And there are much more detailed dashboards that the police use down at the neighbourhood policing level and stuff like that. But I don't really want to get into that level of detail myself or with the panel. It's the high level stuff that the layperson can understand. Like, for instance, 101, non-emergency answering system should be less than 2 minutes or less, rather than the current plus of 7 minutes. Stuff like that we can all get our heads round, understand, and have an opinion on. And only yesterday, in my weekly one-to-ones with the chief, we talked in detail about all of this, and it's lovely how the chief is embracing everything that's in the draft plan, and like me, is wanting to get to a better understanding of what are the performance metrics, so we can all proceed together.
So I think what's at the heart of this is kind of the relationship between perception and statistics. In my one of the things I do in my day job, I work with National Highways, formerly Highways England, and I met with an MP yesterday who was calling for changes to the road network in her area on the grounds that there was a feeling for people that it's a not safe stretch of road, whereas all of our statistics prove otherwise. And what I took note in when you and I met recently, Chris, is that you are defining yourself as a politician, whereas your predecessor very much did not. He considered himself to be a policing expert who now holds a public-facing role. And that's going to shift the way you do your work and the way that this panel operates and the way the police operates. And so what I'm struggling to get my head around is how do the priorities of 300 new officers and 100 new staff members, for example, how does that balance against the requirement to do the work that's been set out in the plan? Is the intention to use those officers to deliver on those priorities? Do we have details on how that's going to be structured?
So the data that we'll be using to measure includes HR data. So we'll be looking at hours worked by volunteers, numbers of volunteers, the numbers of staff that we've got as well, police officers, PCSOs, staff as well. But we'll also be, as I said, that I'm sure this is the same in your organisation, but we look at things in terms of a pyramid where you'll get the very high level stuff. If you want to drill down further, you can, and I'm very, very happy to maybe at a future panel take you through that with colleagues in the colleagues in the ARP team. But we will be developing, as I said, with the constabulary a scorecard for each of the priorities that reflects the detail in the plan, and that will be presented in the final plan to yourselves.
And Johnny, I understand where you're coming from. And it's the same journey I'm on. I'm on this sort of sequence of activity where the very first thing I've got to concentrate on is the big picture strategic stuff, the numbers, the pot of gold. Can I afford things? And there are all sorts of what if games you can play within that. And very quickly, both myself and the chief realised we need to put stakes in the ground. And have a clear joint understanding of where we're going. And then once we've done that, we can then do the detail, for instance, of the training capacity of the training centre. Have we got enough space in the classrooms, enough officers to teach? Have we got enough resources in HR to recruit all the different streams that we're talking about? Extra PCs, PCSOs, special constables, police staff, volunteers. There's a massive work going on. Finance, can we afford to do everything in the sequence we want to do? The chief's got a shunt board within the 300 officers. We've agreed the big picture, the 300, and we think roughly where they're going to go. But as we drill down into those detailed areas, there are changes which the chief calls his shunt board, where he moves the 300 around differently within his force to figure out where he really needs the extra resources. So it's like a ginormous Gantt chart. It's a huge undertaking, and both the chief and I are working hard to try to draw those strands together. And obviously, we all want to get to the end point sooner rather than later, so that it helps us to manage the great beast that we're trying to maneuver. And I would just like to emphasize, if we achieve anywhere near close of all the things that I'm trying to do, that's a 26% increase in establishment. No other force in the country is pushing the boat out as far as we are in Gloucestershire. But I honestly believe we need to do that. If you look at the cuts that took place during the years of austerity, there are all sorts of problems that the police, the constabulary, are trying to deal with. And every time I lift up a stone, invariably, I don't like what I see underneath it. And it's not just a shortage of resources. There's a shortage of auditing. There's a shortage of process. There are leadership issues throughout the force. And I'm trying now to get to grips with all of those issues. Probably the biggest issue is the force control room and getting to grips with that. but I don't want to leave you with the impression that the force is riddled with problems. It's got many, many, many examples of exemplar performance and activity. And only last week, I went out with the counter-terrorist team that was available to deal with an organised crime group in Cheltenham, just on the edge of your area in St Paul's. And it was a very impressive operation of Special Forces standard. And I watched in awe as the force planned and delivered its assault, and it led to the arrest of 3 serious organised criminals.
If I may just jump in just to make one extra point, Johnny, I think one of the parts of the question you were asking is how does the manifesto sort of morph into the police and crime prevention plan? And I think that they become one and the same. So the police and crime prevention plan is the sort of corporate manifestation of delivering on those sort of key 6 priorities that were outlined during the campaign, and it essentially becomes the chief's marching orders to crack on for the next 3 years.
Thank you both for your answers there. Appreciate that. I've got 4 hands up. Just to take a step back for a moment, we're getting towards 20 past 11, and there's a couple more agenda items. Let's make that 5 hands up. So just to put that into context, so we all know how we're doing. So we'll go through, and the 5 I've got, and we'll do this in this order, are Councillor Robinson, and then Martin, Councillor Brassington, Melvin, and Patel. And let's aim to move on to the next agenda item in kind of 15 minutes or so. So Councillor Robinson, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ruth, for your presentation. To Chris, really, you mentioned in the draft plan about making the county a safer place for residents, which I think we would all agree with, and when we're talking to people, they do have concerns. But I just wonder, you know, where are we at this point in time? And we can't be, you know, we can't be too low, surely down the pecking order. We must be quite a safe county as it is. And do we have to rise too far to get to that level, Chris?
Well, it's a very interesting question, and it's one of the areas I've morphed on. The simple answer to your question is we're seventh safest in the whole country in terms of number of crimes, the rate of crimes per 10,000 per 1,000. So that sounds pretty good, doesn't it? 7th safest. But I know, and probably you all know, there's a mass of unreported crime. So, for instance, in rural areas, antisocial behaviour.
Something's gone wrong with our share. I'll just use this one. Can you hear?
Can you see and hear me?
Yeah, we can. Thank you.
Yeah. I'll carry on. Yeah, there's a mass of underreported crime: sexual abuse, domestic abuse, shoplifting, and I want to do a lot more about encouraging the public to report those crimes. There's also an issue, never mind reported crime, there's probably 6,000 or 7,000 crimes that the police force currently do not record, and somehow or other stuff that's being reported to the force control room are not getting into our statistics. It's the problem I alluded to at the start, which means that we need more resources in the force control room to get to grips with that problem. And it's a problem that the HMI Inspectorate report is going to be quite critical of the force. So I think from the point of view of the public, whenever I say to the public at gatherings, oh, you live in a relatively safe area, often they'll come back at me with issues that they're dealing with themselves, crimes that have happened to them or crimes that they can see. So I don't think our county is quite as safe as we may think the statistics indicate. So when I say I want to make the county the safest in the whole country, I've been thinking very hard recently about how I'm going to measure that. Do I look at the ONS force tables that tell me we're 7th in the country? Or do I look, for instance, at what victims are saying, what the public are saying? And I think it's the latter. I need to reach out with proper consultations that are wide-ranging on a regular basis and measure what the public are feeling about how safe they feel.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Could I just ask one more? I had 5, but I'll send the other ones through.
I can't hear you, Steve.
Okay, I have five questions, but I'll send the other ones through to you. Could I just say about the speed watch? Can you hear me?
Sorry, we lost that bit then. I think we've got you back now.
I didn't get any of that response.
Okay. The speed watch. I'm really pleased that you are going to be working with highways, with, I would imagine, the cabinet members responsible for that, because I find, you know, as a within my division, every parish, I think, has a problem with speed through their villages, and it really has been very difficult with highways, with putting things on lampposts where they come back and say they're not strong enough, even though they're probably only 10 years old, and you have to start again with a new lamppost that costs £900, and who's going to find that? So, you know, I would welcome you working more with highways and trying to influence our cabinet members as well within the authority. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I agree entirely there. It is consistently the most talked about issue, certainly on my rural road shows. And the key first thing is to have a strategy that allows the use of this low cost, high technology solutions, things like auto speed watch. I can't over promote a particular solution because that would be wrong. But something like that is a very light box. It's much lighter than some of the VAS systems that you have to attach to lampposts. So I'm not sure whether technology solutions like that will be quite sort of the answer to a maiden's prayer, so to speak. But I'm hoping it is. And certainly I've got the constabulary on side now. I might have to throw a few extra resources so that that they don't complain to me about the volume of warning letters that we send out to offenders. And I'm sure there's more work that we need to do with highways, which, you know, they always seem to be overworked and undermanned. But I know, for instance, on 20-mile-per-hour speed limits, that's a controversial issue. I think probably most elected representatives would probably like to see more activity on that front. And I'm going to be working with highways so that they don't take that procedural responsive approach, which always seems to me to be so negative and you know, providing difficulties about why we can't do this, that or t'other, instead of actually responding to the public. Want to see some sort of solution.
Back on.
Right. Can you hear me? I think I'm back on our original system.
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
Yeah. So hopefully on the 20-mile-per-hour thing, that's another area that we can do something. Too often in the past, when a resident is unhappy about speeding, they get moved from pillar to post, so to speak, between highways and the police. And I'm all about solutionizing rather than who's responsible for something.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I welcome your comments on 20-mile-an-hour limit. We're just coming to the end of ours in Nailsworth, and it's taken 9 years. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Next question is from Martin Smith, who's been waiting patiently.
Thanks. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. This is actually more of an observation, and it perhaps echoes something of Johnny's struggle. I think the plan already reads well, and I'd like us as a panel to be able to support it and promote it. What I'm interested in is the emphasis there is on health approaches to policing, adverse childhood experiences, and I want to make sure we haven't got a dichotomy between let's get 300 new police dealing with those initial issues. And I think we as a group, and you particularly, Commissioner, need to make sure that we keep an eye on both sides of that agenda.
No, good question. Ruth wants to jump in.
Yeah, just in my sort of introduction to the plan, I mentioned that we support the constabulary's approach to being trauma informed. The constabulary's worked a lot over the years with partners about understanding the impact of adverse childhood experiences, and we are not starting from scratch with this. So that's the first thing to say. It's a really good piece, good news there. The officers that are trained now, new officers, are all trained on the approaches we take towards community building, towards being trauma informed. So it starts from day one for them to understand that it's not, we can't arrest our way through all problems. That's not the way we do things. If we want to have long-term sustainable change, it's about going upstream and dealing with things as early as possible. And that is absolutely, it is absolutely essential to do that with partners. It's not just for the police to do this. We cannot just do this as in a constabulary. It's something we absolutely have to do with partners. So I hope that.
I also want to say, first of all, Martin, thank you very much for your support for the plan. That's very much welcome. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, again, you've touched on an interesting area. Public health approach to crime, perhaps in some respects, requires a lot of money to flow into all the other agencies. But, I'm responsible for policing and crime and not responsible for sloshing a whole load of money, for instance, into the NHS and mental health. There are other agencies responsible for that. But I think as the Commissioner, I have a fairly unique position within Gloucestershire, with all the boundaries being coterminous for the county, the police, the NHS, the fire, to look at this holistically and call meetings together so we can work together better as a whole. And it's not always the best way to proceed with public services to think you just need to pour more money in at the top and it will sort problems out. There's a lot of money in the system at the moment, but sometimes it's too stovepiped, and you need to work together within the community safety partnerships, for instance, to find better ways of working. And at the lower level, you've got things like Project Solace, which is a multi-agency approach to dealing with problems on the ground. But we need more officers to go into the Solace teams around the county. So the things that I can control, like recruiting more officers, I will do. And then I will try and encourage people to get round the table to talk together, to find common solutions. And also within the criminal justice system, I think there's a lot more that can be done to bring the different agencies together so that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Quite regularly, I get the force complaining to me about the file requirements that have to be put together to go to the CPS, the Criminal Prosecution Service. And the workload has gone up maybe 20% on officers' time. And it really is having a big impact on the force. The CPS say, well, we haven't got the resources to do this file preparation. Someone's got to do it. So I need to sit down with both sides and stop people blaming each other and try and figure out what collectively we can do together to maximise, for instance, the number of prosecutions over rape or fraud. Both of those issues are woefully under-prosecuted, and we need to do better.
Thanks, I'm happy to leave it there. To do that, sometimes seed-led funding is helpful. That's what the Commission's fund in the past has been able to do, and I wouldn't want that too taken away from you just in the hunt for the more policemen, but I'll leave it there.
Well, interestingly, if I may, that's another area that I've morphed. I've always liked the Commissioner's Fund in principle, and it's very much in line with the public health approach to fighting crime. And I had thought at the start of this process that because I didn't really talk a lot about the Commissioners Fund during my campaign, but I did talk a lot about 300 extra officers. So I'd always felt that the 300 officers must come first, and what was left would be available for the Commissioners Fund. I'm now thinking that when I sit down and do the public consultation and try and figure out what the council tax precept rise should be, I need to make sure it's large enough so that the Commissioners Fund and the community funding and the public health approach to crime can have its own portion of pot of gold so that I can enact that side of my manifesto.
Okay, thank you both. Next speaker, next question is Councillor Brassington. Ray, please.
Thank you, Chair. On Plan Commission, I'm very pleased to see a section on empowering local communities. Could you expand a little bit on how you tend to do that? Because I know in the past we used to have local meetings with the police in the town councils, which were open to the public, so they could come along and question. I mean, I went to your roadshow, which was excellent, but that was all one way. So, are we going to have more local type meetings? Thank you.
Yeah, I hope it didn't end sort of as one way. Obviously, we do a lot of speaking, but we have what I call the Great Mingle, and we got dozens and dozens of questions and issues that the public raised with us, both before the road shows. We congregate a good half an hour before we formally start, an hour before, in the interval and at the end. And generally, I got home about 10 o'clock on each of those occasions because we were having long and meaningful discussions with people. And I see it as a fundamental part of this job that I listen, and I'm not just on permanent send. I listen to what the public want, and that I morph. I continue to develop so that it's not just the mandate I got last May. It's, how is the situation with crime and organised criminal groups? How is that changing? And generally, they change pretty fast if they spot an opportunity. And I've got to morph with that situation so that the constabulary provides a better service. So empowerment in the road shows was all about trying to recruit more special constables, volunteer police community support officers, grow neighbourhood watch, grow community alerts, and also deal with community speed watch and the persistent speeding. And I think we've got policies in place that now will empower parish councils so that they can do a better job in for instance, fighting persistent speeders. I'm always available to come out and speak, so is Nick. It's one of the reasons I recruited Nick, because I found I was even busier than I thought I was going to be, dealing with a lot of internal strategic issues. And Nick's going to be dealing and leading with the public health approach to crime, so that with two of us, we should be able to get out and about more, talk more, and listen more. And with the deployment of more officers, particularly into neighbourhood policing groups, I think they will be able to do what we used to see of officers turn up to parish councils, even if they only do half an hour, and then scoot to whatever problem that they're trying to deal with. And I think that the new geographic structure, where we have superintendents in charge of 2 districts and dedicated officers looking at things geographically rather than over centralised resources, it will mean that we have better communication. The chief jumped on board very much at the start with the road shows, and he was the one who said, right, we must do the road shows every 6 months. So very much that communication is a key part of how I like to operate.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Melvin, the floor is yours.
Can't hear you, sorry.
Can't hear you. No.
Maybe type it.
Yeah, maybe.
Right, okay, got it. Right. Thank you. Thank you very much. I had a couple of questions, but one of them really is, first I'd like to say, Chris, I think you're doing some really good work. But we talk a lot about shortage of resources, but I would like to ask a question, and I hope it's not an elephant in the room, about how effectively we are actually using the resources that we've got already. So when it comes to our existing constabulary, I know we've got some outstanding police officers and some support staff, but we also, I'm sure, are always in a situation where we hear from residents or we experience ourselves not what we would think was the best use of police time. And so my question to you is, what's your experience since you took the role, and what powers do you have as the PCC to encourage our police force and the people running it to use our police officers' time more effectively?
That's a difficult question, I guess, to answer simply. There's definitely areas, you know, if I'd been doing this job for the last 10 years or whatever, looking back over the last 10 years, I think, for instance, there's been a lot of money spent on buildings, public buildings, and not enough probably on other aspects of infrastructure, like computers. If I look at the force control room, there's a lot of double entry activity that goes on when a call comes in, and the operator records the information first of all, and then often has to transfer it to one or two other systems in order to get the response that's necessary and required. That often means things are happening too fast, and in the force control room, there's a big screen showing how many calls are waiting. There's a lot of pressure on each operator to finish the call, finish the task. And I think there are probably decisions made in the force control room over how an incident is, to use a phrase that the police use, how it's crimed, how it's designated following Home Office rules. And I think because of the time pressure they're under, we get mistakes that are made, and we lose information. And because there are problems with processes, that leads to inefficiencies. I mean, for instance, only the other day I was chatting to someone, and they were saying it's taken me 10 days to get a crime number in order to give it to his insurance company so that he can make a claim. Now, if it's 10 days before something is crimed, it's going to be even longer before it's actually investigated. And by that stage, for instance, CCTV information that may have been available could have been wiped, or people lose interest in giving information about the crime. So, to be honest, I do see quite a lot of inefficiencies wherever I look. And I'm finding, you know, I use the phrase, every time I lift up a stone in the constabulary, I find issues, I find problems. Now, it's not my train set, it's the chief's train set. So I can't give instructions on operational matters, but what I can do, and what I do, is on a regular basis, I talk to the chief face to face with some members of his staff and my staff. And I raise issues like this and say, look, this is just not good enough. And the chief, I think, is one of the best chiefs the force has ever had. He compares really well with chiefs around the country. He gets it. He wants a level of excellence just like I do. So I've never had any pushback from the chief over any issue that I've raised. And he always takes it away, investigates it very quickly. And slowly but surely, I feel as if we're making improvements. And I would like to get to that situation where we have large numbers of exemplar type of activities, which will lead to the force getting an outstanding status in an HMI inspector's report. We're not there yet. This next report is going to be quite critical. and it'll mean there's a bigger journey to travel than I thought when I came in May. So yes, I agree with you. Life's not all about asking for more resources. It's about efficiencies. And Councillor Harris, I think, raised at the start about how much savings I found so far, and I talked about the 2 million figure. There's probably more savings to be found, particularly over the employment of up-to-date technology, a new system called Niche, which I think will lead to lots of savings and efficiencies. Ruth would like to add something.
Yeah, I think it's interesting the phrases you use, Councillor, around what the public want, what the public expect. I think it's fair to say that there is a lot of work. I totally agree with what Chris has said, but also there's a lot of work that the police do that the public don't necessarily understand. This is something that I've touched on in previous police and crime panel when we were discussing demands on the service that mental health issues bring. And I think it's fair to say both Nick and Chris have been shocked, I think, by blown away, is Nick's saying, by the amount of demand that we have around mental health, around picking up the pieces, around other services being, on a high state of alert themselves because they're pressured, and that the implications of that on policing. There's a survey that was carried out a few years ago, and I referenced this at a previous police and crime panel, of officers when they started work as a police, and then a few years down the line, when they came to when they were first warranted, they thought their job was about tackling crime, majorly tackling crime, minor issues around safeguarding. A couple of years down the line, that's completely reversed. They see their jobs as safeguarding with a little bit of tackling crime and disorder. And I think that, if officers going into the job feel like that, any members of the public probably feel, at where the police officers were at the beginning of their journey, their careers. And that's something that we've got to understand and work with partners to address as well. Is it right for the constabulary to be picking up the pieces in the way that it does?
And just to pursue that, Nick and I will be going out talking to the councils. We want to engage with each all 7 of the councils and talk about what each of us are responsible for, so that we get clear understanding of what areas each of us should be responsible for, whether it's mental health, whether it's parking, traffic offences, noise, nasty neighbours, fly tipping, littering, whatever, and also talk about best practice. When I go around to each of the councils, often I see areas of expertise that each council has that we need to promote across the county, so that we make better use of our limited resources.
And it's about how we work together in order to have those, to get those right results, whether it's early intervention or whatever it is. But I would just come back just to sum up, Chair, if I may, with the to the police and crime plan. That is our objective. Those are as I said, the marching orders that we're giving to the chief, that we're asking him to focus on. So if it's not in there, then those are the things that we really want him to be looking at, and using his resources accordingly to do things like that, to make sure you've got that community visibility, you've got that accessibility, you're tackling problems early on. We are looking at incredibly high levels of demand at the moment in the service. I think they had something like 48 days straight of New Year's Eve levels of demand on the service at the moment. So we do need more resources, but yes, absolutely, we need to make sure that the resources we've got are being used in the right places as well. And the chief will be the first person to say that. I think Rich wants to come in as well.
Yeah, just to reiterate a point, I think your original question was about what can the PCC do. The PCC cannot fetter with operational policing, but the greatest power he's got is to be able to ask the key question. So why does this happen and why did that happen? And that's when we really come into our own around the hold to account. Thank you.
It was sort of a rhetorical question in a way. So I completely agree with you, Chris. And obviously, this is not a political group. We are apolitical when we sit here. But I think we need to know from you what we can do within our local authorities, or also from a county point of view. You know, where are these resources that should be being dealt with by county now being pushed towards the police force, or maybe it's the health service or somebody else that should be doing or would have originally traditionally done this sort of stuff, that is now they're sending out a police officer because somebody's saying, you know, they're high as a kite and they want to jump out of a window. Well, that clearly needs somebody who's trained in mental health. That doesn't need 4 police officers and 2 squad cars. So this is my main concern at the moment, that the police are being used in many different ways to deal with issues that are nothing to do really with the police force, and that other people who are responsible should be responsible for dealing with those things. Mental health, county council, they're no longer dealing with those issues. They're throwing that all at police officers. And I think every face that's here today would agree with me that policemen should be policing. It's that simple. You know, obviously you need to be compassionate. You need to be trained in mental health, because, you know, that's part of policing. But you shouldn't be doing the job that county or the health service or somebody else should be doing. It's just, you know, you're trying to you're wasting a fantastic resource which we know that we all need for something that someone else should be doing. So I think that's my feeling on it. I'd really appreciate it, Chris, if you could help me maybe offline, let me know what we can do to get ourselves back on track and have policemen policing and not the other stuff.
One thing that immediately comes to mind, interestingly, Gloucester City Council, I think you've just had a motion asking me to come and brief the council in open session about what's going on in policing and do a Q&A. I think the more of those sort of things that I do, the better educated I will be from what, you know, elected representatives are picking up within their own patches, their own wards, trying to figure out what's important in your areas, what's going wrong, what needs to be improved. So that would be my suggestion, going back to the panel, for each of you in your district areas, try and set that up so that perhaps myself and the local superintendent can come to the council, maybe for a half-hour session at the start or whatever, where we talk and do Q&As, and then we leave and you get on with your normal business.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you both. In the interest of hearing what people have to say about what's going on in their districts, I'm keen that we move on to the e-scooter item. Councillor Patel, your hand has gone down. I know you were on the list of speakers. Did you want to come in?
Yes, please. Thank you, Chair. I don't have the hand up facility on my iPad for some reason. Okay. So apologies for that. Yeah, first of all, just to start by saying, you know, this is a clear and comprehensive police and crime prevention plan. It's excellent to see that. I do see a note from Chris which states that no incident or offence is low level or inconsequential. Just on that particular point, and I think Chris touched on that earlier, I have a question in relation to that, which is that I'm pleased that the plan is sort of providing more reassurances to our communities and to victims of crime. I think it's really important that the emphasis on victims is coming back, because for far too long I've seen it in my particular neighbourhood, and the complaints I've received from residents, from businesses, where minor, what can be deemed as minor issues, they don't bother reporting it anymore, and when they do report it, nothing happens. Just to give you a few examples, we have had lots of spate of car break-ins in the past, and because of the fact that residents are having to wait for too long on the 101 number, they hang up, or they see that there's going to be no action taken as a result of their report, so they don't bother reporting it at all. and also, for example, shoplifting. I've had businesses complain to me that they've contacted the police regarding shoplifting, and they wait for days and days before, if the police attend to come and collect the CCTV footage. There seems to be sometimes a two-pronged approach. For example, with depending on where you are and who you are. So, for example, if there was a shoplifting incident in Asda's, the police would be there straight away. You have a shoplifting incident in a local residential area, and it may take a few days or weeks before the police even attend. So I'm really pleased that we are going to see more focus on victims now. And also on the flip side to that, I would also like to say that I have noticed in recent weeks a big improvement, I would say, when we have contacted the police with regard to antisocial issues in my ward. It's been stamped out very quickly. Delighted the local community and the residents and the families living in the area where they've had the antisocial problems have been delighted with the police response. And what they would like to see is that continuing and improving continuously, rather than a decline in the long term. So it's good to see that things are going up. But what I would, one of the questions I have is with regard to the statistics and data, and your sort of in the plan how you will measure the success. A lot of the successes will be based on reducing car break-ins, reducing reports in burglaries, etc., etc. But surely what we are going to find, if we are going to be encouraging more people to have confidence in the police, which I think they're starting to have more, I've certainly noticed that in my ward, if we are going to have that more confidence in the police, there are going to be more reports coming into the police. If there are going to be more call handlers on the 101 line, we are going to get more reports in. So we're actually then going to have initially a huge spike, perhaps, in a rise in crime and ASB before we start seeing a dip. And I think the statistics at the moment, or the data, or the fact that Gloucestershire is number 7 in the best performing police force, I think Chris is spot on here. That the data is, I don't think the data is, there is enough data to support that, because as Chris mentioned, a lot of the crime and ASB is unreported, and I think when you start getting more reports, then we will see a clearer picture. One of the biggest frustrations is the 101 number. People are waiting for too long and giving up. So it's good to see that there's focus on victims, not just the statistics. The question, I keep saying, I come into the question, how often, 2 questions here. Number 1, how often will you be able to provide data to the panel with regard to performance in, say, 101 call time, answering times, crime, ASB, and also how quickly do you hope to bring down the waiting times for 101 calls?
Thanks, Sanj. Thanks for that, Sanj. You covered a lot of ground there. Yeah, I think you're right. To be honest, because I made such a big thing of antisocial behaviour in my manifesto, I think people are more aware that I think it's important. And the reports of antisocial behaviour have gone right up. And so I think whenever a police force concentrates on a particular crime, for instance, it could be violence against women and girls or anything, you're going to get an increase in reports of that particular crime. Now, does that mean we are living in a less safe place? Probably not, because if the public are feeling confident to report something, and the police are actually doing something about all these reported crimes, although the official figures make it look as if crime is worse in that particular area, that particular crime, actually the community feels it can trust its police force better. Victims should feel better that they get a proper service from their force. And often, you know, victims talk to us about what they really want is to be listened to, cared for, given some attention. And that's often even more important than actually finding the person that's done something horrible to them, because they recognize it can be quite difficult to catch the offender. So it reinforces my feeling that we're going to have to look at what do we mean by safe in a different way as we move forward. Now, your questions about data frequency, I guess, you know, you hold me to account. So you might say it's your shot. You know, how many times do you want to be hit with data? I know we're all busy, and doing it too frequently is probably not a good idea. Obviously, as a minimum, we could look at things, say, every panel meeting. Maybe if you want to see it more, you have a working group to look at particular issues that see things on a more frequent basis. Ruth's going to jump in as my performance data expert.
So we actually have a responsibility now to publish data. Once the plan is in place, we then have to start to publish data around the national crime and policing measures. I mentioned that before, and those are the neighbourhood crimes that you can see mentioned in the plan. We will add to that. We will include more than that, and so that will be available on our website. The data around you know, things like 101 calls, crime, that can be up to date. We can get that. I can get that for now from the force. If you want to see how we compare to our peers, there's a bit of a time lag. So you know, I think once we've got our performance framework, our scorecards in place with the force, I'll deliver that to you, and we can discuss how you want it presented and how regularly. That's absolutely fine, but it will be available online. With regards to measuring what people feel, their confidence levels, their satisfaction, their fears, we are, as I said, looking to procure a survey that will mirror the Crime Survey of England and Wales. So that's going to take a little bit more time to come through. But what we'll be looking at in that is how safe do people feel? How confident are they in those agencies that have a responsibility to tackle crime and disorder? So it's not just police, it's councils as well. It's fire service as well, it's health as well. And that's really important. And it's really important to use to balance data with what people are telling us. And that crime and disorder laid that out for us in 1998. This is not new. We just need to get up to speed with it locally. But what we do already have in place is user satisfaction surveys that the constabulary have around people's experiences once they have got hold of the police. And we can look to, and I think we are going to look to include some of those measurements in our scorecard.
Okay, thanks all. I'm going to move on to the next agenda item. The instruction on the item we've just looked at is for the panel to review and comment on the draft plan. I feel that we've done that thoroughly, so I think it's okay for us to move on to the next stage. The next item is e-scooters, the Gloucestershire position. This is an item that I requested being on the agenda, as it's been raised with me by members from across the county, and it's an issue that's prevalent here in Cheltenham as well. And Gloucestershire, it is a county level issue, given that Gloucestershire is one of the county trials for the DFT scheme. So in particular, what I'm looking to find out today is from the Commissioner really is the plan for enforcement. If the trial succeeds at a national level, then the legislation will follow. There seems to be a big lack of clarity here in Cheltenham. I don't know what other members feel about their own districts or what county members feel at county level. But what we're seeing is that the operators' wings is being left to enforce the rules, and that the police themselves are offering verbal warnings and not recording information. And that seems to be more or less a policy choice. So we're very interested to hear from the Commissioner what he thinks is happening and what is the plan for handling e-scooters. I'd imagine that members will have plenty to say on this. So Chris, over to you. Be interested to take your comments from this point. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess this is another good example of the importance of listening, because each of you in your own areas will have seen different things. So I'll be interested to see if there's a collective view over e-scooters. Personally, I've always been open-minded on e-scooters. You know, I think the principle behind it is interesting. It's good. It's part of the 21st century. You know, there are so many issues that we're trying to deal with climate change and all the rest of it, that it's a novel way of traveling about. I think, yes, it's controversial. You know, I've heard lots of people being upset about them, particularly older people, who tend to get the younger person in support and the older people seeing all the disadvantages. I think the government introduced the trial system because they saw that when e-scooters were introduced around the world, say in America or France, if they were done just like parachuting from the air and crack straight on, there are all sorts of issues that can pop up with the delivery of e-scooters, and you need a trial. So I was very much in support of the trial. I was glad to see Gloucester and Cheltenham proceeding with a trial. I thought it was courageous. And a trial is designed to flush out problems. You know, where are things going wrong? I think we could probably all point at things that need to be done better. I'm hoping that when the trial is finished, it'll all be pulled together by the government, and that a way ahead will be figured out. You know, hopefully we can find a way of making these work so that we benefit from all the advantages of them, and we minimize the disadvantages. Clearly, there are lots of disadvantages, and give clear advice to the police in terms of how things should be enforced. The force has put out advice to the constabulary as to how they should, and the public, as to how they should deal with e-scooters. And clearly the constabulary does not want to turn a blind eye to any law breaking. But it can be quite difficult, actually, if you're on foot trying to arrest someone who's doing something they shouldn't. With an e-scooter. There have been a number of seizures over the last 7 months, maybe about 9 a month. So the police are trying their best. But as I said at the start, I'd be interested to hear your perspectives. If you think one area rather than another is being handled differently. Nick wants to jump in.
Yeah, if I might come in here, Mr. Chairman, I think so. I think the approach the constabulary are taking at the moment is sort of engage. They're 3 E's. It's sort of engage, educate, then enforce. I think that quite a lot of there's been a lot of misinformation about the way that e-scooters have been launched, and if I'm perfectly frank, and my personal view here is a little bit of irresponsible retailing as well on behalf of retailers who are marketing these products that aren't necessary. There's no necessarily about it, that aren't legal to use on the roads, and they aren't making that clear. And that's something that I will keep on banging away at on my little personal crusade until people hear me. But when it comes to the formal trial, I think that's the right way to approach it. Those vehicles are they're insured. You have to have a driver's license to use them. I don't know if members have tried the system. I have. I think it's quite a good one, but I think there should have been a bit more communication done before the trials were launched. Not just in our county. I know that in other parts of the country that have got trials on as well, they've done some public forums and the like before the trials were launched to be able to answer some of the very serious questions that the public have. But when it comes to the private use ones, there's there's almost sort of no ifs, buts, or maybes about it. You cannot use them on the road, and the way the constabulary are approaching them is that the first sort of, you get 2 strikes essentially. Your first strike is that you're told that you can't use it on the road, and you need to go and put it away in the cupboard until March next year, which is when the formal trial period is going to end, and the government, I would imagine, will then say what they're going to do with them in the future. And then the second time they're going to get it, they will be seized because they're riding without insurance essentially. And as Chris said, we're sort of seizing them at the rate of about 9 a month at the moment. That's certainly what we've been doing over the last year. And I think that certainly when I've been speaking to officers about it, I think that the level of engagement that they're now getting on scooters suggests that people now know that they shouldn't be using them, and people are being stopped. They're being given their one chance, and then they are being seized and shoved in a shed that's not too far away from where we're sat at the moment. But this is government's criteria. They sort of launched the trials, but maybe there wasn't that engagement with the retail sector that there should have been perhaps to begin with. But I'm interested to know what members think and what their experience of things are as well.
Okay, thank you. Members, if you'd like to raise your hands if you have any questions, virtually or physically. Councillor Gray, and I'm going to join the queue as well. David, over to you.
Hi. So I think that e-scooters are definitely going to be a mode of transport that we need to support if we're going to reach our CO2 emission targets, and it's important therefore that we have these trials and that we learn lessons from the trials, but we enter it in a positive mindset. I know that Zwing, for example, who are running trials in Cheltenham and Gloucester, that the advantage that they have is that they have all this data and can track bad behaviour and therefore take people out of the system so they can't use the cycles if they're being used inappropriately. So I think we need to, the police I know are working closely with the operators of those schemes, and I think that's the right approach, because I do think that one way or another they will end up as part of how we operate transport systems, particularly in urban areas, and the statistics in terms of the uptake of the scheme are quite impressive. So I think it's a question of engaging to reach the best outcome.
I think that's right. I think I probably should have mentioned that myself as well, David. I think if people are using the official scooter trial scooters and they're doing things that they shouldn't be, then yes, absolutely, that's the reason that they have the little registration plates on them, so you know who which plate it is. That should be reported to the operators for them to take action to stop that person from using that scooter in that way.
And the operation of the scheme shows that it is a very small fraction of the users who create the problems. Like with everything in life, the same with cars. It's a very small proportion of the users who create the problem, and it's not the technology. You can fiddle around with various aspects of the technology, but fundamentally, it's not the technology that's the problem. It's having a system that we can, to use a term, police effectively, to make sure that where people are creating being antisocial, that we're able to identify them and treat them accordingly.
No, agreed.
Okay, I'm not seeing any further hands here, but I do have a couple of questions myself. And so, I take a lot of the points that you're making here, and I appreciate, and I agree, especially what you're saying, Councillor Gray, there about the usefulness of the form of transportation and the likelihood that we'll see it. I'm sure the trial is going to be a success nationally. I don't think there's too many people who think otherwise. But it is this question that enforcement should be the responsibility of the operator. That's akin to suggesting that enterprise should be policing people who hire their cars, and I don't think that's appropriate. And speaking, I'm speaking. Sorry, I should say I'm speaking here as the Cheltenham District Borough Council rep here. what's being reported to me, as I said at the start, is that the police officers are intentionally not recording the incidents here. They are, and so to go back to this ties into what you were saying earlier about a volume of unreported crimes in the county. We can't, on the one hand, say, well, we need to do something about unreported crimes, and then on the other hand, say we're going to allow our police officers to not report them when they find them, and allow the responsibility of enforcement to fall on operators of these vehicles. That seems to me to be what is happening. I've not heard a rebuttal of that, and I'd be interested to get clarity from you specifically on that. And it'd be interesting to know what you know, because my information comes directly from some of the sergeants at Cheltenham Constabulary. And so the really, really direct question is, from the police commissioner, from the office, what instruction are you giving the constabulary to enforce at the moment? And what will your instruction be if the trial is approved?
So there's two different points there that I'd like to raise. The first one is that that's an operational matter, and we don't have anything to do with operational policing. So the policy that goes around those are for the constabulary and for the chief to look at. Having said that, if there is particular evidence and issues that you would like to raise, and it sounds like there are, then please do send them through to us, because that is something that I would like to pick up. That's not something that I'd been aware of before. If offences are being committed using the Zwings scooters, such as riding on the footway, using a mobile phone, going through red lights or whatever, there are offences. Those people are committing offences, sort of come what may, regarding the insurance matter. Doesn't matter. They've got a driver's license and they should be fined, and there will be points that will go along with that as well. So if there are issues, please do send them through to us, because that's something I would like to pick up. I get your point. I think this is, again, where there's that little bit of a balance between when you're talking about e-scooters, I think lots of different people have different issues with e-scooters, and it's difficult to nail down the point that's one particular point to talk about. So yes, please, essentially, do send through that information, because that's something I would like to pick up and make sure that if that is the case, then we can certainly hold to account and ask why that is the case.
Absolutely, but you appreciate it's not for members of this panel or district councillors to be reporting crimes to the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner. And I take your point, but to kind of put that a different way, rather than ourselves raising that with you, and I understand you want to be notified of the stuff so you can look at it. The question is, does the data that Zwings have match the data that the police have? In other words, because Zwings are enforcing and they've circulated information about fines and what have you, is that translating into fines from the police and points on licenses?
That's not data that we've got available at the moment, but we can certainly ask the constabulary to look into it and find out, because I think it's a good point that you've raised, and I'd like to pick it up.
Okay. Could I ask why the data is not? Why you don't have data on this issue? This is an item on the agenda. It seems to me that you're unprepared for it.
Well, that link between Zwing's data and the constabulary's data, that we haven't in our office.
The analysis to look at that. We wouldn't necessarily have access to Zwing's data. We're a separate entity to the police. The police might have that data. We need to ask some questions. I don't think the specifics that you're talking about was translated in the request for the item. So, but thank you for clarifying, and we'll come back to you.
Okay. Councillor Patel, your hands up.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question about the table on page 52. It gives details or stats around the number of e-scooters seized. I suspect there will have been cases where fines may have been issued, where users would have been spoken to by police officers. Is that something that's? Do we have any data of those offences recorded?
I can get that.
Yeah, we can get more data. I'm sure. Whether some of this is fully within the remit of the constabulary, or whether it's the courts, criminal justice system, I'm not sure. But certainly we'll do our best to get more information so that you can have a better understanding of the whole problem. Yes.
And just to update the figures while we're talking about that table, the number of seizures in August was 8. Just so that you've got the fully up to date statistics. But yes, yeah, I think we can definitely definitely provide that information to the panel. And yeah, just to the chair, I don't think that specific item that's the specific question that you were looking for was communicated to us. So I'm sorry that we can't provide that data at the moment, but I will endeavour to get it through to you.
And Johnny as well, if you come across cases where you've got sources of information that indicate that constables, officers are deliberately ignoring crime, I'd be very interested to have that information. Anonymous is fine, because I just don't accept that for any crime, and I often hear it in regard to things like drugs, that the police aren't interested in a low-level, cannabis type situation or whatever. It's not consistent with that zero tolerance approach to antisocial behaviour, the broken window philosophy and theory. And whatever the reasons that this may be happening, it's just wrong. And the HMI report that I keep on referring to will go to the heart of crime reporting. And currently there's maybe 6,000-7,000 crimes that have not been officially recorded, that were reported by the public, and we've got to sort that problem out. It's a big issue, which can lead to all sorts of issues in terms of how we provide support to victims and deal with crime hotspots and all the rest of it. So your observation is a serious one. So if you're up for it, please provide us with information that I can then go to the chief with and say, look, we need to address that problem.
Appreciate that, and yeah, I'm happy to send over email exchanges between police sergeants and cabinet members here in Cheltenham. But that also says to me that, as far as you're aware, the Gloucestershire Constabulary is enforcing any instances of any violations that they find.
Yes, and certainly that's what the chief has said. Is if this is another example of me lifting a stone and finding it's perhaps not quite what we think it is, that's one of the beauties of this system, holding to account, flushing out inconsistencies, so that we can help raise the quality of the overall performance.
Absolutely, yeah.
Chair, if I may just come back, I have witnessed many a times e-scooters being probably privately owned e-scooters being driving in an antisocial manner. Only yesterday on the school run on a busy main road, London Road in Gloucester, I was driving out of the city centre on London Road, and there was a young man on a e-scooter who literally came across from the opposite direction, opposite lane, riding towards oncoming traffic on the cycle lane on London Road. I do often see e-scooters being ridden at silly speeds in my area. I've seen users with mobile phones, a lot of the antisocial offences that we talk about. But then I have seen, the trial scooters being driven sensibly and professionally. But one of the concerns I do have is with regard to these scooters being ridden on pavements on visually impaired members of our communities up and down the county, and that is a concern, so which perhaps needs to be looked at. And I'm not sure whether that's going to be the police's job to do that, or whether that's something we need to speak to Z-Wings as part of their trial as well. I do have some data from Z-Wings, which was received in a newsletter yesterday, and they issued 16 fines, 4 account bans, 6 account suspensions, and 10 formal warnings. It doesn't say what time frame that was over, but it is showing that they are taking action where they receive complaints of misusing and irresponsible driving. Thank you.
No, thank you very much for that.
Do any of the members wish to comment on this item, or should we move on? Okay, I'm not seeing any further hands, so thank you for that. I would like to pick this up further. It may be a case that the issues that I have to raise are more pertinent to Cheltenham, and if that's the case, I can do that outside of this panel. So the next item is on the future of the mounted police, and Chris Nelson, that's with you.
If you go to your agenda now, Chris. At the end of the agenda now.
Thanks. Yeah, on mounted police, I've looked at this. I've set a team to examine the employment of our mounted detachment. And the initial view is that the existing model is not really fit for purpose and isn't really achieving what was talked about in the business case. It's too small. And what we're looking at is if we expanded the size of the unit, would that make it more viable in terms of providing support, mutual aid to other forces for things like public order offences? Can we raise sponsorship support that was originally talked in the original business case? And is this what we want to do? I'm more aware of the value of horses in the context of Gloucestershire. We don't really have very many public order issues. Obviously, there's the odd football match and things like that need to be policed. But it's more from a neighbourhood policing, community policing, the value of the horses seem to be. So from my point of view, the jury is still out. I'm not quite sure what the future is going to be of that unit. I looked at it initially because at Bamfurlong we had a brand new stables being built, and I wanted to see whether I could stop that or not. And to be honest, it just wasn't a sensible thing to do. The contract had been running for too long, and the costs of stopping the build of that stables, it would have cost more money than we would have saved. So it wasn't a sensible business decision to change the existing contract for Bamfurlong. We're attempting to reach out to a number of influential people within the county to see whether we can find sponsorship. We're also looking at mutual aid, what the scope for mutual aid is within the southwest region. I think 2 of our horses are going to be used on the climate conference in Glasgow in a few months. So that's perhaps an example of where we can provide support. And as in all things, I'm evidence-driven, evidence-led, rather than looking at these issues emotionally. But I'm not there yet, really, to know what a final decision could be.
Okay, appreciate the update there. Do any members have comments or questions on that item?
Yeah, sorry, my hand's up.
Councillor Melvin and then Councillor Brassington. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Chris. I think this has always been very controversial. I agree we're a rural county and it's all very pretty and it looks lovely, but the reality is that we're a business. Every aspect of us, whether it's the police or it's county council or it's a city council or a borough council, we're all running businesses and we need to see whether, which I know you've been looking at, whether these things are viable. My first question is when our horses are drafted to somewhere else, is the full cost of that billed to that area? Or are we putting our resources on loan to someone else? Because I don't know that I feel that the local taxpayers' money is being used very well if we're just lending them to Glasgow. And then the other side of it is that if we have occasions where we think we need police horses for, you know, kudos or whatever it may be, highlighting us as a rural community, can we not pay for that service and go to another police authority and say, right, well, what will it cost for you to send 4 horses to us? Because I think that using that money when we need bobbies on the beat and we need, you know, the most up-to-date technology, whether it's for cameras or anything else, to be using it for horses, however lovely I think they are, and I do think they're gorgeous. It's lovely to see them. But, you know, there's lots of things I'd love to see, but we can't afford it. And I think the business needs to be spending its money where it's getting its best bang for the buck. So, yeah, my question is, do we charge that on to other local authorities? And the other comment I'd like to make is that I'm pretty annoyed that any previous, no disrespect to anyone attending today, but that if when the decision was made to bring these horses in, if that was done and approved by this police and crime panel, or there was a nods up from it, I'd like to know what on earth we were doing signing contracts for stables and goodness knows what else that we then couldn't get out of, because that is money which obviously belongs to the taxpayer and has now been wasted. If you could let me know, Chris, when you respond, how much that cost was for those stables, that would be amazing. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, you've touched on some sensitive issues. First of all, the simple one. One of the reasons I'm interested in mutual aid is that it does provide a good rate of return to the constabulary, and would really help to make the horse unit affordable. I think it's £1,000 per day per horse.
No, it's 2 horses and 2 riders, and the income generated from that is £1,000 per day.
For 2 horses. Yeah. Obviously, the officer thing is a separate argument. And really, when you look at this, it's the cost of the horses and all the related costs of the horses. I have to say, on the Bam Furlong thing, I was not a happy teddy bear with the way that contract was handled with my predecessor. It went to contract a month or so, I think, before the short campaign started in May. Martin would probably say he'd been trying to get this on contract for donkey's years and wanted to deliver it and had support from the panel for it. But I just felt a 12 million project to be finalised just before an election was not very democratic. Whether I would have done anything different, I don't honestly know. I just made the point in my campaign that I think it should be left for the new Police and Crime Commissioner to review whether that was full value for money. And there are lots of issues to look at. That's £12 million. That is a lot of money that could perhaps have been spent on something else. The stables, I think 700,000 or 800,000 cost within the Bam Furlong thing. It was a substantial amount of money. So, you know, if I'd had my hands on it, would I have agreed Bam Furlong and the stables? I just don't know. And because it was already decided, I've concentrated on other things, the big strategic issues. I've not revisited the decision-making process for Bam Furlong because there'd be little value in spending time doing that. It's a fait accompli. I've got to live with it. The stables were too far advanced to stop. So I've kind of put the horses issue a little bit on the back burner with their future undecided until I get more answers on this mutual aid and sponsorship, and then sit down and have a proper discussion with the chief over how useful they are. He's a firm fan of the horses, and I've come across a lot of people who are, but I'm well aware of the political sensitivity. There are a lot of people who disagree out there, so it's going to be a difficult thing to resolve whichever way I go. And Ruth wants to jump in.
Just the whole issue around the mutual aid and sponsorship. That's not something that we plucked out of the sky. That was that's based on experiences in other areas. Probably the most successful force around mutual aid and sponsorship is Merseyside. They've got a fabulous model there, and it was part of the original business case for the mounted section. That is in a part of the business case that hasn't been realised, and one of the reasons, the main reason for that, is because the size of the mounted section has remained very small. So you cannot offer up, you can't realise the potential. What we're looking at is as close to cost neutral. Would an expansion, would we be able to, I should start again, would an expansion of the team enable us to become close to cost neutral with sponsorship and mutual aid in a similar way that Merseyside has achieved? So I just wanted to reiterate, this is not something that we've just plucked out of the sky to think, oh, that's a good option. We're looking at best practice elsewhere.
Yeah, thank you, Ruth.
Can I come back? Is that all right? So it's very quickly. So the reality is, and I'm sure there's a number of us here today that know something about the equestrian, across the equestrian. By the time you allow for your admin time to organise rental, if that's what you want to call it, to another force, and transport, insurances and everything else that you're going to be needing, I can assure you at £1,000 a day, including your riders, there's absolutely no way that that's cost neutral in a million years. And the other thing about it is, when you run a business, when you make a bad decision, which clearly, if part of a business case was that there was going to be sponsorship, and all these years down the line, whoever indicated at the beginning, because I'm sure there would have been some foundation to the opportunity for sponsorship, if those things didn't then realise, we should know now that that was not the right angle on that. You know, we obviously, if we could only afford it or make it a sensible thing to have done with sponsorship, then all these years down the line, I don't think, and especially at this time with COVID and businesses being stretched, I really don't think it's suddenly going to be something where people are going to be queuing up to sponsor it. But more importantly, if you make a bad decision in a business and you buy one car that doesn't work properly, you don't then go buy another two. So sometimes we have to just look at things and say, look, we had a go, it didn't work, but let's not waste any more money on this. It seems nonsensical to even be thinking about making it bigger. But anyway, I'm one little cog in a huge wheel, but that's just my feeling on it from a business point of view. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Melvin. Still got a few hands to get to. The next speaker was Ray Brassington. I'm also seeing indications from Councillors Gray, Burford and Patel. It's 12:35. I'm personally happy to continue, and I'm happy to be led by you, and I appreciate members have plenty to say. I'm not aware of other people's diaries and how long they can stick around for. I'm just pointing out the time. If members need to leave, then you're welcome to. If members wish to stay and ask their questions, I'm quite happy for that as well. And I appreciate, obviously, the Commissioner team may well have other stuff to do today. So next speaker is going to be Ray Brassington. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I have to leave at 1 o'clock because I have another meeting. But the question I was going to ask is, how many horses do we have, and what is the annual cost of having them? Thank you.
6.
When the report is finalised, we can make that available with all that detail in.
Yeah, I mean, we do have a lot of information at the moment, but it's not been pulled together as a final report. And Ruth is just suggesting that when we've got all that pulled together and we've got answers on the sponsorship, clearly we'll go public with the report.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And just to check, when you print that report, will that be a report of the final decision? And if so, do you know when you're planning on making that?
I've not got a specific time. At the moment, it's not my number one priority. I put it on the back burner. The officers involved doing the research have got many other things. So we're not engaging with too many extra costs at the moment, just keeping things ticking along. It's a question of what the future is. Do we expand? Is it a good idea? I suppose if the answer is that we don't expand, then I think the inevitable result will be the end of the horses unit. But that's not something that I can dictate. I run the budget, I hold the police to account, but it's the chief who decides the operational makeup of his force. So there are definitely sensitivities all around this particular subject. Wherever I look, it's a bit of a minefield.
Appreciate that. That's actually a really usable answer. So appreciate that. Councillor Gray.
We don't want horses in mind. That would be particularly unfortunate. I do think that the idea that you come back, and I think we need to hear the chief presenting the case, because horses is, if you just look at it in terms of money, it's very difficult to understand whether it makes sense or not. I think we need to have an operational explanation of why the chief. I think the commissioner said that the chief is a fan of the horses. I'm sure, you know, we're all fan of horses in the generic sense, but why, as a police chief, is he a fan of horses? So I think we should get that report before any final decision is made. I'd like to hear from the chief and the police commissioner once you've got your final assessment, and explain the thought process that's been gone through and how the commissioner has assessed the decision made by the chief.
Yeah, I think we can arrange for that. I suspect your next meeting, you'll be wanting to talk to the chief about something else rather than horses. So maybe the horses will be the next meeting after that.
Thank you. We'll have Councillor Burford and then Councillor Patel.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Johnny. Yeah, right, a few things here. The first thing, I think I've got to agree, if we're going to send 2 mounted officers and their horses to Glasgow, and we're going to get £1,000 a day back, we shouldn't send them. Because there's no way on God's earth that can be even remotely what our costs of putting people in. You couldn't put 2 blokes, relatively unskilled blokes, in a van and send them to Glasgow for £1,000 a day. It would be business suicide. So that needs to be dealt with. The second thing, I think, is that did somebody say £700,000 or £800,000 for the stables at Man Furlong? Is that right?
Ish.
What are these stables made of? Are they gold plated?
It's a new build.
Yeah, you could have a new build of 6 stables for, I don't know. You do it for 100,000 without any trouble at all. What's going on? But anyway, that's not really my point. My point is that it strikes me, having sat through this meeting, that there are some real issues here about financial control and the use of funds, use of public money. And I have to come back to my question at the beginning of the meeting regarding the extra personnel that we're going to be putting on. I did a few quick bits of arithmetic. If we're going to be putting on an extra 400 people over 3 years for £10 million, I think that's going to mean that, including the on costs, we're going to have about £8,500 a person to spend to do it with. Everybody knows that is completely unrealistic. So I think, Johnny, Chairman, sorry, as a general point about what I've heard at this meeting, we need urgently to be getting some high-level costings on almost everything that we've heard about today, so that we can actually scrutinise it properly. Because it's no good coming to a meeting when we're discussing a precept increase and find that we're going to be asked to look at and accept a 30% increase in precept. It's just ridiculous. So I think an urgent item for the next meeting needs to be some high-level costings of the way the constabulary is going and what the commissioner's intentions are regarding finance. Because from what I've heard today, I am extremely concerned, to say the least. And yeah, should we have police horses? Yes, I think it's a very good idea. There are situations where police horses are of great value to the constabulary, not the least in a PR role. But honestly, can we just get some costings that are in the real world and find out where the money is going? Because real problems, very real problems as far as I'm concerned. Thank you, Chairman.
No, thank you for that. I appreciate that. The next panel meeting is in 5 weeks, and we discussed earlier the possibility of arranging a financial working group. I'm also with you on looking further ahead to the prospect of this panel being requested to raise taxation further again, when we may not have full details of how we're funding 400 new staff members, for example, and why we're spending money here and there.
Yeah, I mean, I think, sorry to butt in, Chairman, but I think my issue with the 400 staff members is, as I understand it, we've got, what, somewhere just over 1,000 officers at the moment. Somebody will correct me when I get this wrong. And we have additional support staff on top of that. And there is obviously the cost of employment for additional officers and the need to provide equipment for the additional officers. To my mind, that looks like putting 400 staff on could be a 30-40% increase in cost to the constabulary. I would like to hope that somebody has got a vague idea where that money's coming from.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I talked at the start about the need to engage with the panel in a working group. We've got all the figures. I don't have them in front of me at the moment, but obviously we've got all the figures to justify support for the big strategic plan. And on the horses and the stables issue, it's why a few minutes after I came into this job, I said, right, we need a proper study to look and examine at the horses section to make sure it was a good example of spending public taxpayers' money. And I've done that throughout the whole of the constabulary. It's why for the last few months I've been doing nothing else but digging into these financial matters because they're important.
Realistically, looking ahead at timescales, I mean, if you have the as you say, you have the numbers available, then there should be no reason why we can't look at them at the next police and crime panel meeting, which is in early November. But the idea of forming a working group and providing those figures to a working group to review them and present something back in 5 weeks, I think is extremely tight. But I think I think it would be reasonable and a sense of appetite in the room for this, for the office of the commissioner to be prepared to kind of present in some fairly reasonable detail at the next meeting in 5 weeks' time. If members of the panel are able to form a working group and meet between now and then, and I know we had 1 or 2 people saying that they're interested in doing so, then we can attempt to do that, but I don't think we're in a position to guarantee that based on such a tight turnaround. I want to bring Andrea in because she's indicating to speak. I'm sure she can give us some good guidance on what to do here.
Okay, I hope you can hear me now. Yes?
Yeah.
Oh, good. I'm actually on my phone. Okay, so I think the issue here is that clearly members want to get into a lot of the detail, and I do think, given that we know the inspection report is due out, that your next panel meeting will need to be focused on that inspection report, and if the OPCC could put that into the chief's diary now, that'd be really helpful. And I do actually think if you're going to go into detail on the finance, then you do need to look at the working group, and you do need to use that working group within the context of planning, your response to the precept. So I think, the working group could, send ad hoc reports to members about what you found so far. But I think, trying to squeeze things in a short period of time is not going to give you the time for consideration. Diaries, let's face it, are a nightmare. But I think if we plan the working group such that your deadline is obviously the precept meeting, and we structure a timeline around that, then you can actually present all of that detail. You'll get that measured and considered understanding of what the issues are and how the Police and Crime Commissioner is responding to them. I'm deeply concerned that, if we rush into something, you're not going to get the information. And obviously, because the inspection report is due out, then you need realistically to clear your agenda for the 3rd of November, because you will need to spend some considerable time going into the detail of that without the pressure of another meaty item afterwards. I hope that helps.
Yeah, thanks, Andrea. And on that, we've got the chief's diary, I think, available for he's had to reorganise his world in order to be available should you wish to have him at the panel. I think if that HMI inspector's report comes out over the next few weeks, which is what I anticipate is going to happen, it's quite a hard-hitting report. And it's about failures in the force control room and crime data integrity and all of that. These are big issues, which I would imagine you want to talk about first. And that will inform your understanding of the financial world in which I'm swimming in terms of, for instance, the 103 extra police staff. So in sequence, I think it's probably going to be the HMI report, and then starting to look more closely at finance and whether you use your panels or a working group to do that. Well, it's up to you as to the best way to do it.
Sorry, Chairman. These are the sort of things that really irritate me. We know that there's going to be a precept meeting early in the new year, February probably, I think, isn't it? We need to be way ahead of this with some financial background. Way ahead of it with some financial background. If we've got a report coming, which by the sound of it is going to be damning, I agree. We need to talk about that, and it's probably as well to have the police and crime panel meeting, which is pretty much dedicated to that. But the financial stuff, in my view, it's got a different it's got a different type of importance, but it is equally as important. So let's put another police and crime panel meeting in addition to the one that's planned in 5 weeks' time, so that we can talk about the financial stuff in a proper forum.
I think in previous years we've held additional meetings, or we've held additional briefings rather than meetings relative to. I think Martin Sill made presentations to the panel to brief on his decisions when it came to the precept, kind of a number of weeks in advance. I think they were January in the past. So I understand the concerns here. It seems obvious that we need to focus the November meeting on the report, which will come out in between now and then. I think everyone will agree with that. We then have from between November and February to make a decision about the more kind of financial interrogation we need to do on some of these numbers ahead of any proposed precepts. And I do note also that, Commissioner, some of the language you were using earlier was about how much to increase the precept by, that being an assumption that there would be an increase in the first place. And there are major considerations going on there when we look at what's happening economically in this country at the moment. So I don't think it's appropriate to present that as an absolute certainty. I'm aware it's 10-1, and I'm not sure we're going to get an agreement as a group right now. I'm going to suggest, Andrea, that you circulate some options to us and some dates. I'm prepared for us to establish a working group if that's what members want to do, and I'm sure we only need a handful of people to make that work, and I'd imagine we've got at least 3 already. In terms of the details of whether that happens in December or January, or who reports what to when at what point, we can figure that out, and we don't need to figure that out in the next 10 minutes, realistically. Is everybody happy with that we proceed on those grounds? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Do we have any further comments on the mounted police? We have one, Councillor Patel, yes.
Thank you, Chair. I just had a sort of observation and also a question. The observation is that we do sometimes see the police horses in my ward occasionally. There's no problems, no issues, and they just randomly turn up, stroll around a few streets, and disappear again. So, from my point of view, and from many of my constituents, they do feel like, they ask the question, what purpose does this part of the police serve, and also, how do they prioritize which areas they cover when? Because they focus more on the rural areas, do they focus more on urban areas, and how do they decide why they're coming into Barton and Treadworth at 8 o'clock in the middle, at night time, when it's like a ghost town? What purpose does that serve? Is it purely to show that they're clocking up hours by attending doing their job and attending a certain area? But 8 o'clock in the evening, when it's pitch black, they serve no purpose. So yeah, the question really around how do they prioritize their time? How many hours do they spend a week out and about, and the split between urban and rural? Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, that's all contained in the report, which will be made available to you, how they are deployed. There may well be that they've been asked to go to an area for a reason that you might not be aware of, but they are deployed across the county for a variety of reasons. May well be as part of a problem-solving package to deal with antisocial behaviour, for example. I know recently they've been to Cheltenham for that purpose. But as I said, the full detail is in the plan, which will in the report, which we will make available to you when finalised.
Okay, thank you. I'm keen to press on. I wasn't sure whether or not, Councillor Gray, if you've indicated to speak, I can't tell.
I was just going to say what you said in terms of the route forward.
Okay, thank you. Okay, final item, panel work plan. I'll hand over to Andrea for the last couple of minutes.
Yeah, I mean, I won't dwell on it, obviously, because the time has gone on. I mean, clearly the next meeting we will be focusing, you will be focusing on the inspection report if it is out. I'm picking up on Councillor Melvin's comments about mental health. The panel did look at that a couple of years ago. It'd be good to revisit that, and I would, on your behalf, talk to the OPCC on structuring an item on how to actually bring that forward. Like I said, given the timelines, I think I'll leave it there because I'm sure people want to go. But I would suggest, if you haven't already emailed me about the budget working group, then please let me know that whether or not you want to be involved. And also picking up on Martin's point from earlier on the Chief Exec's report. There's a lot of work goes into that, and panel members don't always ask a lot of questions. So the suggestion is that we drop that back to maybe 2 or 3 times a year, so that it gets, the attention that it does deserve, if you don't receive it quite so frequently. That's all I've got to say.
Yeah, that was my understanding of it as well. Okay, fantastic. Unless there's any last any stones we've not picked up and looked under yet, I think we can call it there. I appreciate this has been a long meeting, but I also want to thank members for your contributions. I don't think we've wasted very many words today. We've just had a lot to say, and I think that's a good thing. lesson here is potentially we've got too many items on this agenda, and that's something for Andrea and I to consider in future. But I feel that we've got a reasonably clear perspective on what we're intending to do over the next few months as well. So I'm happy to call the meeting to a close here, and I don't see any further hands.
Hi, could I just ask you, Chris? I just had a quick question for you. Is it okay to hang on for 2 seconds?
Yeah.
If I could just come in. Oh, hang on. I'm gonna. If you're gonna go offline now, then I do need to obviously end the YouTube link. So if you could just bear with me while I do that.
Or I can quickly ask the question now, if you like, if everybody else wants to.
It's up to you. I mean, you did talk about going offline.
I tell you what it is, Chris. I was just looking at a couple of reports I've got here from another committee that I sit on. The other option with the stables could be, I don't know where we are on building at the moment, but you could chat to other authorities and other people that are associated with us, and rather than being forced into still building those stables, if the decision that is made that actually it wasn't something we needed and it's not something we should be doing, perhaps if they haven't started the work, that contract can be transferred onto something else. So maybe in a rural community, you might need something else building, or perhaps the rangers in one of the local authorities might need a building. But you may find that the contract that you've got with that company, that those funds, is what I'm saying, can be used for something else.
We explored all those sort of options a little while ago, and they weren't really viable. So we're proceeding with the original contract.
Wow. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for staying on, everyone. Really appreciate it.
Okay, I will now end the YouTube link. I'll let you know when we've finished.
Thanks everyone for your time.
Okay, you are now offline.